No, so I'm going to swap it out with 6 p.m.
I want to take this opportunity to introduce someone who's been in our audience. It's our local councilman for the City Council, who has been unequivocally, staunchly supportive of downstate. And we're really lucky to have Matthew Eugene here. And so would you please like to stand up and take a... Not that many people come, so we really make a big deal. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for this warm introduction. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Matthew Eugene, and I'm the New York City Council member representing District 40. That means where you are at right now. And I say that all the time. I feel blessed and fortunate to have this wonderful, remarkable, historic institution in the district that I'm privileged to serve. I'm talking about Downstate Medical Center. And I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to thank Dr. Lucchesi and all the great members of the staff, all the professionals, doctors, nurses, and technicians who are working day in and day out to make Downstate Medical Center such a wonderful institution, not only in Brooklyn and New York, in the state of New York, and also in the United States. Thank you so very much for everything that you do every single day for my constituents, for New Yorkers, and beyond. Thank you very much. You know, today I have two very important public hearings in the City Council. The first one is going to start at 10 o'clock. But I said to myself, I have to come over here because this is such a very important forum, very important meeting. And I said that I have to come to thank all the organizers, Downstate Medical Center, all the speakers, and all the organizations. And I know we have some organization also from the federal, state, and city organization. Thank you so very much to all of you. Let's put our hands together for them, please. Thank you. It is important because being prepared is so important, especially now, because you know that New York City is a target, regardless of whatever we may think. But in addition to that, natural disasters, you don't know where they come, and you don't know what the extent is going to be. And it is very important that we get prepared. Not only we get prepared, we are prepared, but we educate also the people, the constituent, the citizen, for them to know exactly what to do in case of a disaster, natural disasters. No one can forget Sandy. What we saw in Sandy tells us clearly that we are vulnerable. We have to do more to be prepared, to save life, because if you are prepared, not only you will be able to save life, to decrease the damage, and also to facilitate, to make the relief effort easier. You know, I was born and raised in Haiti. And you know, Haiti has been struck by many natural disasters. And what makes it worse for Haiti, because they were not prepared. They don't have any, emergency preparedness institution. And that's the reason why I started speaking with many of my partners, like Dr. Lucchesi, and many doctors and other professionals at Downstate Medical Center, to help me create a permanent emergency service or institution in Haiti. I'm going to conclude by saying that what you are doing here today is very important for every single citizen or person in New York City. It is very important for them to know exactly what to do when they are facing emergencies. If they don't know, it's going to be catastrophic, you know that. And I want to let you know that I'm willing to work with you, and I'm willing to partner with you to see what my office can do to bring a little contribution, whatever we can do, in the wonderful task that you are trying to accomplish. And again, to all of you, thank you so very much. Thank you not only on my behalf, but on behalf of the people of the great city of New York. Thank you. God bless you.
So the next topic, and I know many of you have the agenda, but I think we kind of ran out, which was sort of exciting. So be prepared, how to ensure your readiness for the unexpected threat by Donnie Stone. And I'll let you introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name is Donnie Stone. I am a EMS operations captain at DFW Airport there in Dallas, Texas. So thank you for letting us come out here. I want to kind of expand on what Dr. Berger said. There is no one way to respond or be prepared. And then one of the biggest things about these presentations is to kind of give you some thought-provoking ideas and what to expect. Specifically, this one is individual and hospital preparedness. There was a question a while ago, and what would be one of the contributing factors that somebody would target a hospital. I'm going to actually address that here in my presentation. So some of my background is 20 years firefighting and EMS. I'm a paramedic. I'm, again, currently a supervisor for our work there in Dallas. When we left yesterday, just to give you guys an idea of the temperature, was 90 degrees. We've been blessed with a little different temperature up here with white stuff on the ground. So again, thank you. Everything about our experience here at Downstate has been great, and we appreciate y'all hosting us. So, got a lot of information we'll try to get through and move through as quickly as we can, so I don't bore you for more than about 30 minutes, okay? So, some of the objectives and what we'll actually discuss today. We'll discuss why we're here. We'll discuss some motivating factors for why you as a hospital and you as an individual would be interested in preparing or what to see. We'll expand a little bit on what Dr. Berger said about as far as active shooter incidents, what actually defines an active shooter incident. We'll talk about some of the SBI statistics. We'll also talk about specific statistics that are relating to hospitals and why it would be important for you guys to be prepared. We'll talk about how to respond as individuals, what to expect, maybe what you would expect as an individual when the law enforcement arrives. We'll expand on that towards the end of the presentation. We'll also talk about some situational awareness and kind of ways for you to be prepared. Our intent is to give you some ideas to be prepared to create distance and maybe time in the event that you're ever involved in one of these incidents. We'll also talk about some specific hospital shootings that each one of them presents some valuable information that maybe you could apply at your facility or for you individually. So why are we talking about this? Specifically, I think we all can agree that safety for yourself, safety for your staff, safety for your patients, and safety for your visitors is your absolute number one priority. We also talk about this because we want to be proactive. It's always better to be proactive rather than reactive. And in the intent of preparation, the idea is to be prepared in a quiet, less stress environment instead of one of those where you're trying to figure out what to do and without any preparation in the beginning. So we also want you to think about making a plan, and a lot of this comes from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Some of you may be aware of the new guidelines that they came out with last year that have to be implemented by November of this year that regards to specific policies and procedures, actual mock drills, tabletops that will be required. And so, again, this is another reason why we're actually talking about hospital and individual preparedness today. So to expand on Dr. Berger's definition of an active shooter from the Department of Homeland Security, it's an individual that actively engages in killing or attempting to kill people in a confined and populated area. Sometimes that's really kind of hard to see and hear and talk about. But the scary part about active shooters is that We don't know when they're going to happen, and we don't know where they're going to happen, and we don't know who's going to do it. So if you're able to think about it now and how you would react and how you would respond, this is really the time to be able to do that. Active shooter situations are normally over within 10 to 15 minutes. So what we would consider to be the damage is already done. With the chore of recovery and how you're going to respond after that is really what you have to build into your plans. So active shooters, biggest challenge is we, again, can't predict when it's going to be. We can't predict where it's going to be. There are statistics that show from the FBI where they have been previously, but we don't know where the next one's going to be. The shooter, in most instances, is willing to die, and there's no prediction into who his next victim is going to be. If you're between point A and point B, you may be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So again, the reason why we talk about this is so we can give you some ideas and to prevent maybe some distance and some time for you to be able to protect yourself and those around you. Some of the active shooter statistics from the FBI will kind of expand again on Dr. Berger's presentation. 160 events from 2000 to 2013, about an average at that point 12 per year, with over 1,000 casualties. About half of those were wounded and the other half were killed. The surprising thing, though, is from 2014 to 2015, there were an average of 20 per year. That is nationally, obviously, and we'll get into a little bit about regionally and geographically where they're located, but in 2014 and 2015, there were an average of 20 incidents per year. There was a meta-analysis study done from 2000 to 2015. The U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, Brown University, and Johns Hopkins University contributed to these statistics. There were a total of 241 shootings in the hospital setting after 2000. So what does that mean? That means that 59% of them took place inside the hospital, 41% took place outside of the hospital on the hospital grounds. Shooters were overwhelmingly men, in fact 91%. Locations specifically were at the emergency department about a third of the time, parking lot down to the patient rooms. And then the victims were 45% of the perpetrators and 20% were the hospital staff. After the hospital staff were the visitors and then patients. In 2015 alone, there were 19 homicides that were witnessed by the healthcare industry. 16 of those were committed intentionally by gun violence. That's a 46% increase from 2014. And here's your geographic locations. 44% were in the south, down to the northeast being 16%. So statistically speaking, these bring up past. We don't know where the next one's going to be, but it does show that this actually does occur in your specific area as well. A while ago, we talked about, there was a question about what were some of the reasons behind hospital shootings, and the number one reason, 1/3 of the shootings were because the perpetrators held a grudge. And held a grudge is broad. It could be they held a grudge because, you know, their family member passed away, to no purpose or blame on the facility. It could be for social violence. It could be gang violence. It could be domestic issues. That's all kind of rolled into the social violence. There were 14% they wanted to get away. Some of those actually were inmates that obtained the weapon from the person that was guarding them, and so there were numerous shootings because of that. And then the outcomes specific to hospitals were 46% of the perpetrators committed suicide, 25% were arrested, and 16% were killed by police. The Parish Medical Center in Florida, in July of this last year, There was a gentleman that entered the hospital facility around 2 a.m. that had no absolute tie to the facility. This gentleman walked up to the third floor, didn't have any relation to anybody on that floor, and then proceeded to shoot and wound and kill an 88-year-old patient and the sitter that was with the patient. And so the reason why we discussed this one and specifically brought it up during this presentation was the two unarmed security guards that were actually on duty during this time tackled and restrained this individual and effectively prevented any other injuries that could have occurred after the original response. Is that something that is listed in their policies and procedures as one of their expectations? I don't know. But it is an absolute fact, as shown here by the quote from the police chief, that it was because of the actions of those unarmed medical center or unarmed medical staff that they actually saved more lives and prevented more injuries. In January 2012, in Georgia, this specific gunman actually went into the intensive care unit, targeted his wife, targeted his wife's mother, and shot both of them in the intensive care unit, turned around, walked away, went and turned himself in at the local police precinct. This is one of those that you can't prevent, had nothing to do with the hospital itself, other than the fact that the patients or the victims were located on their facility. Again, we can't predict these, and we don't know when they're going to happen. Next one's Bronx, Lebanon Hospital in 2011. There was a suspected gang member that was receiving hospital treatment in the emergency room for an unrelated injury. Another rival gang member came in and started firing his weapon towards that specific gang member, and two hospital employees were shot in the process. One was a nurse that was shot in the arm, and I think the security guard was shot in the groin area. Again, two hospitals employees that had nothing to do with this specific incident, but it happened to occur. Apparently this shooting, as any other shooting in a facility like this, would cause mass pandemonium. There were victims and parents and children crouching and hiding and trying to get away. And eventually this gentleman left actually before he was met with any resistance from the hospital staff. So, in November 2010, Palm Bay, Florida, there was a hospital employee that was recently fired due to bad attendance that showed back up at the hospital, wanted to say goodbye to his coworkers, had threatened suicide multiple times. And when this employee showed up, kind of holed himself into one of the back offices and ended up shooting himself. The fact of the matter is that nobody really knew if he was still alive or not. So what that created was a potential threat that nobody really knew if it was accurate or not. So because this hospital had created emergency plans and had practiced incidents similar to this, they continued to evacuate as in specific areas of the hospital. They actually said that during this incident there were surgical procedures that actually continued on in different parts of the hospital because of the preparation that they had already laid out as far as their emergency plan. And until a couple of hours later that they were able to make contact with this victim to notice that he was eventually contacted by SWAT and was deceased. So the entire 2 hours that they were thinking that there was a threat there was actually never a threat to begin with. February last month, Houston, Texas. Y'all may remember this one. This is actually close to where I live. So when I get a news alert that there is an active shooter present in the state that I live in, I know I obviously get concerned. Basically, this was an incident, and the reason why it's specific to this presentation is because it really never was an incident. It never was a threat. There was never a shooter found. But that being said, because of the high-profile nature of a shooting or a gun in a facility like this facility actually went ahead and activated their emergency plan. They started evacuating patients out of the emergency room. They transported one patient to a different facility that would require a little bit more care that they would able to provide in a different unit. But it took 2 hours for this to occur. So it took 2 hours to clear the facility, and essentially it was unfounded. So the activation of their emergency plan worked just like it was supposed to, and it was essentially a dry run for them. But this is one of those things that you may have incidents in your facility that turn up to be unfounded, thankfully. But at the same time, you may actually have one of these too. Social media has added to the amount of awareness that could easily get out to the public and to news agencies as well. And so, again, this is something that could occur in your facility. About 5 years ago, when I first started getting involved in rescue task force response model, somebody asked a while ago about kind of SWAT medics type stuff. This was one of the specific incidents that kind of stemmed that. The Aurora Century 16 shooting in Aurora, Colorado. Y'all may remember, shortly after midnight, a man walked in after a Batman premiere and had a gas mask, ended up throwing grenades, ended up shooting and injuring 58 people. 12 people were killed. The premise of this incident was you can learn from it from many different ways. For me, there was an obvious disconnect between police and fire. The fire department was located about 300 or 400 yards away because they couldn't get anywhere near the scene. The scene was still an active threat. They didn't know where the perpetrator was. And so you had this specific incident, you had 27 patients that were transported by police car. And so the police cars actually transported to less than 2 miles away to the nearest trauma center. So just like Dr. Berger said during his presentation, you get 27 patients at once, no matter what kind of trauma center you are, you're going to be inundated and overwhelmed. So an outside type of influence or an outside incident can also tax and overwhelm your facility as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be one occurring on your property. So, active shooter protocols, what can we do as individuals? What can you do as individuals? And what should you do and what should you teach? Again, like we said a while ago, there is no one way of doing anything, but this is kind of an idea of what to think about when you start building your policies and procedures and what you're telling your personnel to be prepared for. One of the nationally accepted ideas or teachings that has been pushed out lately is the run, hide, fight model. We'll talk about it in detail here. So what do you do when you're met with a shooter or gunshots or whatever? The first thing you're going to do is try to figure out a way to get away. Run as fast as you can in the direction opposite of the gunfire. It sounds simple. Again, if you don't prepare yourself mentally or think about what you're going to do in an incident like this, we're all going to, we all may not respond the way we want to. So you're going to run. Situational awareness. I know I have kids. I actually have 3 kids. If we go into a restaurant or in a hotel, I ask my kids if this building was to catch on fire, how are you going to get out? And they get tired of me asking them that. But they know ways of getting out of buildings. Exit signs aren't just lit up for emergencies. Exit signs are something that you as individuals should be a little bit more aware of to determine how to get out of situations that you don't necessarily want to be in. Running to cover, and I'll show y'all some pictures here in a little bit that are somewhat simplistic and not really intended to make you laugh, but to show you how simple the difference between cover and concealment is. Cover is actually a barricade or a hard object that will actually stop and prevent gunfire or a bullet to get to you, where concealment is basically so the shooter or somebody else can't see you. So, but the bullet can still get through it. An example of that would be a hospital curtain. They can't see you, but obviously that concealment is not going to prevent you from getting injured. So you're going to move from cover to cover. If you're in the open, an example of in the open would be maybe a cafeteria type setting. You may have to go from one pillar to another pillar, or from one wall to another wall. But your intent is, if you're in the open, to run and run to cover. If you can't run, if the shooter or the danger is between you and your exit, you may have to hide. And hiding means you don't want them to see you, obviously. So cell phone goes on silent. You can't make any noise. Where do you hide? In a place like this, you have to make that decision when it comes to you. But you're gonna hide, and we'll go here in a little bit, and I'll show you some hospital settings that you could use as perfect hiding spots. Worst case scenario, if you can't run because the danger is between you and the exit, and you can't hide, you may have to fight. Nobody really likes to fight. Well, I guess there's a few people that like to fight. But nobody really wants to fight. But this is what we would consider basically the difference between you living or you dying. If you have to put up a fight, if you have to use makeshift and improvised weapons to defend yourself or defend your coworkers or defend your family, defend patients, for the patients, you may have to do that. And so I'll give you some ideas of, anything heavy, fire extinguishers, chairs, those kind of things you may have to actually use. Again, none of us want to have to fight, but this is your last ditch effort before you get out of the area and to get out alive. So where are you going to run? It's hard to, and I'll show you some sounds here in a little bit of what gunfire actually sounds like. But how do you hear and how do you tell where gunshots come from? Sometimes you don't hear the gunshots. Maybe you're running because everybody else is running. Try to pinpoint where the danger is coming from. A lot of times it is easier to follow a crowd and to move with them, but you're going to want to obviously run away from the shooting. And how many shooters are there? And some of the statistics for the FBI, they say that 98% of the shootings, the active shooter events from 2000, when we started actually following them, have been one shooter incidents. But if you listen to the news media, every single one of them have multiple shooters. Have y'all noticed that? But 98% of them actually have had one shooter and one shooter alone. So what are safe ways out of the building? Building code, normal building code, up to, and this is the national fire code, the national building code, so it would be standard in any state or location that you're in. They have to have exit signs that mark how to get out of buildings. In fact, most of them have to be lit as well. So pay attention to where these exit signs are. If you go to a stairway or a window, these are other suggestions and ways to get out of buildings. If you're in the open, you move cover to cover. Again, we talked about the difference between cover and concealment. Cover will actually block and stop bullets. That's your safest bet and safest place to hide. But if there's no cover, sometimes you actually have to conceal yourself. When you're hiding, if you can't run and there's no way to get out, if you hide, you're going to take some steps to make yourself invisible. And again, a lot of these are simplistic. They sound easy now, but when you're involved in an incident with gunfire and you can't get out, now your heart's beating about 150 times a minute, you're breathing really fast, you're not making, rational decisions because this isn't something that you've ever been exposed to. So this is, again, why we try to think about and plan for these things right now. So you'll want to close the blinds, block the windows. Again, one of the biggest things is to silence your cell phone. If you can be heard, you might as well be seen. These next slides are going to show you the difference between cover and concealment. Again, they're simple. They're not meant to really be funny, but I want you to see kind of the difference between concealment and cover. So nobody can see her, right? In her mind, nobody can see her. I would not recommend this as actually an area of refuge for you. Getting there, right? We can see feet, we can see hands. Is that door going to stop any bullets? No. Again, this is concealment. So it looks like she's maybe playing darts, or I have Nerf guns in my house, about 25 Nerf guns in my house. And between my son and my daughter, this was what it would look like in my house. She's taken in trying to conceal herself from the other person. But again, the drapes are not going to provide cover. They're just going to provide some way to hide. Again, you may be able to see him. It's certainly not going to stop any bullets. Again, nobody can see them, right? How about this one? This one? Or that one? Now, the intent is to show you that just because you can't see the bad guy or the shooter doesn't necessarily mean the shooter can't see you. So cover is your biggest friend. Your cover is what will prevent you from being injured potentially, and you're going to want to try to find a spot that's actually one that protects you and also prevent the shooter from seeing you. If you have to hide, and we have these bags up here that I'll show y'all here in a little bit if anybody wants to come up and look at some of this equipment. We recommend that you can keep regular everyday items located in specific areas throughout your hospital. We call these ourselves, we call them go bags. They have everything from door stops to glow sticks to rope. So our intent is if we can add any bit of time or any bit of distance between you and a shooter, or your staff and the shooter, and it's from one of these objects in this $15 to $20 bag, then it's actually done its job. There are eye bolts in here if you, and again, we'll show you these later if anybody wants to actually come look at them. They're eye bolts that you can actually use to secure doors that don't have locks on them. I know most Most stores that we that you have in your facility will have locks on them, but we can show you actually how to use these eye bolts. They actually go between the door and the jamb, and they will prevent the door from being open. So if you're having to hide, and this is one more thing that's adding to the time that it takes for a shooter to get to you, and this creates a little bit of deterrent for them, this could save your life and it could save the life of others. What else? Hospital beds. Hospital beds are really kind of challenging to move anyway, right? But with the lock on them, they can actually block doors and prevent anybody from getting into the room that you're in. If you're having to barricade a room, anything and everything that you can put in front of the door, the better. Anything and everything. These are just some suggestions of how to secure maybe unit doors. Obviously, this isn't something that we would necessarily recommend in normal situation. This is something just to kind of give you some thoughts that you could look into for your facilities. So when you're hiding and you're having to call 911 and you're making a phone call to determine and to let the operator know that there is an incident where you're located, these are just some of the things that you can look out for and what you're actually going to pass on to them. Some of those information is what's happening, where are you located in the building. That's really important for preparing them to respond. Do you know if there's any injuries? How many assailants are there? Can you describe the assailant? Can you describe what clothing that they had on? Can you describe maybe what type of weapon that they have had? And do you recognize them? Do you know them? Is it a coworker? That kind of thing. What did you hear? Did you hear 1 gunshot? Did you hear 14 gunshots? Those are the things that you look out for and what you're actually going to pass on to the 911 operator. All right, so the next couple of slides, and we'll move through these pretty quickly, but I want to give everybody a preface that we're going to play some slides that have gunfire in them, and I want you to be able to hear what they sound like so you can recognize them. The first one is a rifle and what it would sound like. Can you turn that down just a little bit? Thank you. The next one is a semi-auto pistol. A little bit more. Keep going, because the next one's going to be a shotgun. Perfect. All right, this is a shotgun. It has the obvious cocking mechanism at the end of it. You know what that one is. And that's what an automatic or an AK-47 would sound like. So again, if you had to fight, what weapons could you use? Again, it's between you is life or death. You're going to want to pick up anything and everything that's heavy that can prevent you from being injured or hurt. Coffee pots, coffee mugs, chairs, anything that you can actually get your hands on. This may actually depend on how if you live or you die. So law enforcement response. We're going to fly through this as quickly as we can, but what you should expect for law enforcement. When the law enforcement responds, everybody is considered a suspect in the beginning. And that's because they don't know the information, they don't know what's going on, they don't know who committed this incident. And so some of the things to look out for is don't flee, don't run, follow their commands. You'll notice that most law enforcement agencies will send in what we would call a contact team. The first 2 to 3 responding officers will go as one, and they'll move to the sound of gunfire. The intent of that contact team is to stop the threat. And so one of the things that we found over the years is that active shooters stop when they're met by resistance. And so the quicker the cops can get to them, I say the cops, the law enforcement officers get to them, the easier and the quicker the actual shooting will stop. The initial responding officers may not stop and talk to you. They may not stop and treat you if you're injured. This is one of the things that you have to be aware of. Again, their number one priority is to stop the shooting. When you evacuate, you're probably going to move to an area where you can be questioned about what your involvement in the incident was and what you saw and what you heard. So expect this process to take some time, hours most likely. You would follow again their commands, and you're essentially under their control and power until they actually release you. So that's one of the things that, or some of the things that you would have to be ready for in the incident or incidents this actually comes and you're involved in one of these incidents. So situational awareness. Situational awareness is because we don't know when and why and how this happens or when the next one will happen. We don't know at what pattern or what target they will choose. And we don't know really where the next one's going to occur. So these kind of things, if you're prepared and aware, that you can actually prevent yourself from being the next target. What can you do as an individual or a facility? And this is based off of what the Center for Medicare and Medicaid comes up with. You're going to want to have an emergency plan that is an all-risk or an all-hazard approach. You perform a risk assessment and then figure out what your strong points are and what your weak points are, and then apply your emergency plan to address those weaknesses. You'll develop and implement policies and procedures. You'll have a communications plan to ensure patient care is coordinated within the facility. One of the things that you should think about is if you're inviting or bringing in agencies or entities outside of your hospital. In other words, if you're going to call EMS to respond, ambulances and fire trucks show up, you're going to need to communicate with them, and you're going to need to have the ability to talk to them, to lead them, to guide them, and show them where they're going to respond. And then you're going to have a training and testing program. You should have initial and annual trainings, and you should conduct drills and exercises that test your plan to see what gaps you have in your plan so you can actually adjust those and implement the changes to make sure that you're prepared. What else? Any questions? Yes, sir.
You said you work at DFW, so I was just wondering if there's anything similar to how at airports they have more preemptive measures, like metal detectors or sky marshals that fly with you. Do you think that that would be a smart implementation in a hospital, like a healthcare marshal or
Okay, so if I hear you correctly, your question is in a hospital setting, would you recommend metal detectors or other preemptive measures to prevent these types of incidents?
yeah, like a marshal or something that
Okay.
like undercover?
And I think those are going to be specific to what facility that you're at. Those kind of security plans are ones that could be prepared and are specific to each individual facility. You know, where your hospital here may be completely separate from another hospital on the other side of the city.
Unfortunately, we're running a tad late, so I'm going to cut back the questions for now. We will have some at the end, and everybody here from Global 7 is around to talk if you need to. Also, this is a good time to talk to your home institution. If you happen to be from downstate, obviously, got to talk to me. But if it's some place, if you're somewhere else, I can certainly put you in contact with who it is at your institution, Kingsbrook, Brookdale, whatever, to talk to them about these issues, because they're really important questions, and we're delighted you're having them. But we're going to go on to the next topic now. So thank you so much. So this is the cavalry is here. Now what?
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Lanita McGee. I'm the Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Management for Global 7 Environmental Health and Safety. We do planning, training, and exercising all over the country, not just with hospitals. We have oil and gas facilities. We have a bunch of different agencies that we work with. The ultimate goal is whatever your facility or your organization is to treat you how to take some protective measures, not only to protect yourself, but in your environment, some very vulnerable people who can't get out of their hospital bed and run away. So what we're going to talk about here is what happens when everybody shows up at your organization. I've been in emergency management and homeland security for 25 years, have been privileged to work at the state level. I've worked at the local level. We evacuated the 2 Ebola positive patients out of the airport that I was working with at the time, and I've worked on hurricanes, wildfires. I've been very fortunate to work with some really amazing individuals, some of which are gathered in the back of the room. So I'm going to take just a quick second to introduce you. You're only seeing 3 of us today. The rest of us are here for the active shooter component. Because of that, we're very law enforcement heavy. It takes folks who know law enforcement tactics and strategies to be able to respond accordingly. So I want to introduce him really quick. Mark Pellegrino is a state law enforcement officer. Dr. Steve Berger is the captain in the U.S. Navy, also the ER physician in Dallas. Rosie is a deputy sheriff, with a local. That was very graceful, Rosie. Clay Regan is also local law enforcement from the state of Texas. Eugene is with Boise, Idaho Police Department. Katrina Shedd is a local law enforcement from Dallas. Matt Williamson, local law enforcement, Dallas. David Hornsby, local law enforcement, Dallas area. Brad London is Dallas Fire Rescue, firefighter paramedic. Mark Friendly is with TACMed Solutions. They provide a lot of the tourniquets and medical response components that you'll see, and you'll probably start seeing more of those deployed throughout hospitals. And Claire Barnes is a state law enforcement officer from the state of Texas. So this is our team. We're very humbled to be able to work with them. As I said, we're very law enforcement heavy, but we mix all of the disciplines depending on what we're working on at the time, whether it's a hurricane scenario, tornado, or something of the like. We want to make sure that we bring folks in that speak your language, that can talk with you about what some of your concerns are and what you need to do to not only prepare yourself, but prepare your organization. So what we're going to talk about in this particular presentation is now that everybody has shown up, and I will tell you during this type of incident, there are going to be a lot of people with weapons. You're going to get state, local, federal law enforcement officers. You're going to have hospital police officers, some armed, some unarmed. You're going to have folks in uniform and out of uniform, which can cause a very chaotic and very confusing situation. What you need to understand, Donnie has touched on it, Dr. Berger has touched on it, you are unfortunately all suspects until proven otherwise. That's really a hard pill to swallow when you're in your work environment doing what you do best, okay? But it's important to understand when these law enforcement officers come in here and they're amped up on adrenaline, they don't know who the good guy is and who the bad guy is. And sometimes the bad guy is unfortunately amongst us. One of the biggest threats that we have these days is something called the insider threat. Somebody who works with us or somebody who works for us, somebody who knows the ins and outs of our facilities, our floor plans, where our vulnerable populations are, and maybe wants to take advantage of that, and we've seen that. So we'll walk through this component of it. All right, what is the incident command system? It's used all across the nation. It's intended to be an all hazards response. It gives us a flexible, scalable, modular approach to be able to respond to any type of incident. You've been impacted by Hurricane Sandy or Superstorm Sandy, depending on who you talk to. Hurricane Matthew has impacted facilities. All of those, when they come in, this is an organizational approach that helps you figure out who's going to do what and what resources they're going to do it with. All right? It's a coordinated response. It should be all of the functional agencies that are responsible for managing that particular incident or that particular response working together for the common good. So who's in charge during an active shooter incident? The cops. Where are the cops in charge? There's lots of bad guys, right? Maybe one bad guy might be 2 bad guys. What's the most common confusion during the initial stages of any incident? What's going on? How many are there? When our officers were attacked in Dallas, one of the most confusing parts was the echo factor of the gunshots, which made our officers believe there was more than one perpetrator. There wasn't, but it takes a lot of time and effort to run that down and figure out, is it a real incident, is it not a real incident, and how many people are involved if it is a real incident. Okay? So we work through making sure that all of the entities are actually represented. The cops are in charge. Law enforcement is in charge during an active shooter incident. But does the hospital not have a vested interest in advocating for your rights as well? What are your rights and responsibilities? This is where you speak and I listen. What are your rights and responsibilities? Patient care, right? You have a very vulnerable population. It's much different in a hospital setting than it is in a movie theater or something like that, because your folks may not be able to get out of bed and run away. So you have a duty to protect and care for the patients, certainly those who can't care for themselves. You have a responsibility and a duty to protect and care for each other. It's much different when they're strangers and you don't know them and they come to you than it is when these are your friends and colleagues and neighbors laying on the floor in front of you bleeding out and you're having to do something like Dr. Berger has talked about. It's a much different environment. It's a much different scenario. We're all working towards the same goal. Law enforcement's job is to come in and contain the threat, whatever the threat may be, identify the perpetrators, and then figure out, are they still a threat? If they are still a threat, they're going to take care of that. Fire rescue is going to come in. They're going to start helping you care for these patients. You are a hospital, and you have a lot of good resources at your beck and call and at the ends of your fingertips. But when you're in this situation, your response is going to change, because now it's in the hospital versus being outside of the hospital and coming to you. Okay, we're going to integrate. We're going to make sure that police, fire, EMS, and hospital personnel are working in concert to make sure that we can handle this situation. Who knows your facility better than you do? Nobody. You get a bunch of cops who come in here, even if they're SUNY downstate, hospital police, there's a limited number of them on scene at any given moment. They're going to be really busy going to figure out the threat. When additional law enforcement officers come in from NYPD, or if you get a federal response because there happens to be an FBI agent close by, or a U.S. Marshal, or a drug and alcohol enforcement agent, those folks don't know your facility. They're going to rely on you for things like blueprints, access to your CCTV systems. They're going to ask you, if we think the perpetrator went down that hall, how do we know what's at the end of the hall? Is it more vulnerable populations? Is it a supply closet and they can't get anywhere, so we have them contained? Only you have that information, which is why you need to be prepared to be part of incident command. We've got the FBI here, NYPD is here. They're going to talk to you about the law enforcement response. But what you need to understand is they can't do their job and be successful without you advocating on behalf of your hospital and your operations and personnel. All right, here's the Hospital Incident Command System, or HICS. How many of you guys have gone to any type of incident command training? Raise your hand. Okay. If we have an incident in this hospital today, are you comfortable performing adequately in an incident command role if all of a sudden you find yourself in an incident command position? You good with it? They're going to work out well for you? Okay, there's going to be challenges, there always are. But the intent is to always do the right thing for the right people at the right time. And as long as you keep that in mind, and remember, you have all these different partner agencies that are going to come in and help you and support you, then at the end of the day, we're all going to be successful as a group. All right, it's deliberate to prevent confusion. Just because Dr. Lucchese is the president of the hospital does not mean he's going to necessarily be in charge on behalf of the hospital. Number one, he may not have the knowledge, skills, and abilities. Yes, he's a very important person in your organization, but has he ever helped manage this particular incident before? There may be someone more capable or more qualified. So one of the things that ICS focuses on is it's not just the person with the most important title. It's the person who has the important knowledge, skills, and abilities to make sure that we can do this and we can do it the right way. So we don't focus on that. We don't put people in positions just because it's the politically right thing to do, or we're trying to be sensitive and not hurt somebody's feelings. At the end of the day, we need to handle this incident. We need to manage it accordingly with the people who are capable, qualified, and experienced. You will have situations in your hospital where you have no one who has particular experience to handle that. Ebola is a perfect example. Nobody in here has responded to Ebola, have you? Okay, but when it comes in your hospital, you're going to learn quick, fast, and in a hurry what some of those lessons are and how to make it work. All right, here's the definition of command. It's anyone who has the explicit statutory, regulatory, or delegated authority. Examples of that, you are delegated the authority to do your job every single day. You know when you come to work that you have a job to do, and you call upon the resources and the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be successful in that. That's what we do every day. The FBI has the statutory responsibility to respond to any suspected or known terrorist-related incidents, and that's why they're here today, is to show you guys the importance of this partnership. All right. On the incident scene, the incident commander has the authority to assume command. Very often, we'll actually go into something called unified command, and we'll explain that in a minute, and I'll show you a chart that's relative to that. But the bottom line is the buck stops with somebody. Somebody's in charge of the incident and all of the resources and personnel and knowledge, skills, and abilities that are working to get your hospital, your organization back online. Why do we use it? Number one, you're required to. If you receive any kind of federal Homeland Security funding, you are required to comply with the National Incident Management System and the Incident Command System. This is based on 40 years of incident response. It started out in the fire service. Unfortunately, on 9/11, which you folks are intimately familiar with, there were a lot of challenges which then precipitated the fact that this has now become a grant management piece. You've also got the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services that are now requiring you to comply with certain aspects of it. The bottom line is it's the right thing to do. It makes sense, it's proven, it's tested, it has its challenges, and many of its challenges are based on whether or not you know what you're talking about and you know how to set up the incident command system when it is appropriate. All right, helps to ensure the safety of responders and workers. We want to make sure everybody's accounted for from a personnel safety. If law enforcement comes in, they're going to ask you immediately how many people were in that room. They want to start accounting for that person. As an organization, you need to be able to account for your personnel. How many were in the room? What kind of impact do they have on your environment? What if we lost 4 of our emergency room doctors because this type of incident happened in your emergency room? Do you have the ability to maintain your operation minus 4 doctors immediately? Don't forget about the psychological trauma and the psychological aspects that come with this as well. So physically, you may have lost 4 of your physicians because they were injured or heaven forbid, killed. But psychologically, you may lose more who were witnesses or nurses or food service personnel or custodial staff who were also impacted. So you've got to think of this long-term cascading events. All right? We have specific objectives that we're working off of when we're responding to an incident. Everybody knows what right looks like. At the end of the day, here's what we're working towards. Here's what we want to make sure that we're able to check the boxes on so that we can get your hospital back open and serving your community like you're supposed to be. There's a finite number of resources. It doesn't matter what it is. You only have X number of emergency room physicians. You only have X number of law enforcement officers and patrol cars and firefighters. What this helps do is ensure that resources are used efficiently and effectively so that we're not wasting it and we're not taking it from the rest of the community. Life goes on outside of our incident, and because we're hyper-focused and we have tunnel vision on what's going on right now, you've got to remember, there's still heart attacks in your community, there's still car accidents, there's still flu going around that's going to have a potential impact on the resources that you're trying to reach out and grab. The objectives are going to be based on the incident themselves, but the top 3 never change. Life safety, we need to make sure that we are minimizing any potential casualties, both from the public, but more importantly from ourselves, who are trying to make sure that we can get this organization set up and we're not impacted as well. Stabilizing the incident. How do we make the damage stop? What we want to do is stabilize it, try to contain it, make it stop from getting any worse, and then move on and start cleaning up the mess that's afterwards. And then preserving property. One of the challenges that you will face as a hospital, if you have some kind of crime situation, and Agent Kim is going to talk to you about this, is the crime scene preservation piece. Unfortunately, if this particular incident happens in a part of your hospital, that part of your hospital is now a crime scene. And one of the things that you need to be sitting there asking yourself is, what workarounds do we have in place? If we don't, do we have partner agencies that can work with us on this? If we have to go on divert, or heaven forbid we have to close, who is going to be impacted? Do we owe them any type of communication? If we're going to start pushing all of our people to other hospitals, shouldn't we be communicating with them and letting them know that this is happening so that they understand? There's also potential for something similar to happen in their hospital, so we want to make sure we're giving them the latest intel and information. Here's what the resource management cycle looks like, just really quickly. It's making sure you know what you have, where you have it. How many tourniquets do you currently have at SUNY Downstate Medical Center? Doc? You have no idea, okay? Usually in the surgical areas, there will be some kind of tourniquets, but when Dr. Berger gets up here and talks about tourniquets and you have someone rapidly bleeding out in front of you, and they will if they experience this type of incident, these are things that you need to know. What resources do I have and where do I have them? I missed part of Dr. Berger's presentation, but when he was on duty on July 7th, when 7 of our officers came through the doors of his emergency room, one of the first calls he made was, go get the bucket of tourniquets, because he knew that the severity of the injury was going to probably exceed the capabilities that he had right on hand. It's a small investment, but it's something that can literally save lives. Knowing what you have, where you have it, how do you call and get it? How much of it do you have? Is it currently in working order? If it's something that we continue to go long-term, how do we get more of it, regardless of what it is? If we have a shooting incident at SUNY Downstate, we start running out of hospital police. Where do we get more hospital police? Where do we get people who are more familiar with SUNY Downstate? And these are questions that you need to be asking yourself. If, at the end of the day, there's a potential for reimbursement, we need to make sure that we're tracking all of our costs. We need to make sure that we're accounting for all the resources we ordered, because some auditor is going to come in and ask the question, you ordered this, what'd you do with it, and how can you validate the fact that you actually needed it? We use something called manageable span of control. Right now, you have a supervisor, regardless of who you are in this organization, you report to somebody and he or she probably has more than one employee. On an incident, what you will find is that ratio will greatly decrease because of the number of resources and the fast-paced working environment. So we look at something called span of control, and we say 3 to 7, managing 3 to 7 resources, 5 is optimal. That way you can function at a high level to make sure that you have what you need and where you need it, and you have situational awareness at all times. Oops. Okay. We use common terminology. Here's just a perfect example of it. In other words, we don't use 10 codes. We don't use hospital speak. When you have a situation go on that impacts your organization and multiple people come in from around the city or the state, they need to know what you're talking about. This particular definition in your environment more often than not means emergency medical technician, but you can see there's 7 other definitions associated with the same acronym. So don't be surprised if one of the things that the responders say to you is, I don't understand what you're saying. In your world, it makes perfect sense. When you bring folks in who don't work in your world, it gets very confusing and overwhelming. So we need to make sure that we're all talking the same language, common terminology, plain speak. All right, the Unified Command folding into the National Incident Management System, it is a team effort. And our law enforcement officers are going to come up here and they're going to emphasize the fact that we can't do it without each other. We just can't do it. They need to come in, they need to contain the threat, they need to take care of the situation, but they can't do it with you helping them get access to your resources or taking care of the victims or whatever the situation is at the time. Okay? You being part of the solution still allows you to maintain your autonomy, your authority, your own policies and procedures. Those don't change. What we need to do is find that common terminology and that sweet spot to make sure that we're managing this incident to the best of our ability. Here's what an incident command response might look like. Here we have a fire service. In your case, FDNY would come in. Law enforcement might be NYPD. And then we have the hospital component. Whoever that highly experienced, qualified, capable individual is would be part of Unified Command. There's an operations section, which is then controlling all the resources that are doing the work. These are the boots on the ground, the people who know what they're doing, the people who are really good at what they're doing, and you as administrators and high-ranking personnel need to get out of the way and let these people do their jobs. Them doing their jobs helps everyone else be successful. Don't lose sight of that. All right, here's another example of what an incident might look like with your hospital incident commander. Here's your command staff, liaison officer interacting with all your different agencies and organization. Safety, because we must maintain the safety of our own personnel, as important as it is for us to care for our patients. It's more important for us to care for each other because we can't take care of our patients until we can ensure that we're safe. Public information is going to be a huge piece. The media is going to descend on you. You're going to have to stay ahead of rumors and innuendos and falsehoods and try to do that. That's why it's important to have that public information, and underneath are more of the people doing the work. Okay? We work off of something called an incident action plan. It's a written document which then dictates who's doing what. It's a roadmap basically of how we're going to manage this incident. Can be oral or written, doesn't have to be written, but it's more simplistic. As your incident increases in complexity or continues to go on over many, many hours in some cases, you're going to want to start writing stuff down. During 2005, when Hurricane Katrina impacted New Orleans, we had about 500,000 folks evacuate to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We were running a shelter that was feeding 10,000 people a day and sleeping 3,500 people at night, and it lasted for 45 days. I did not know on day one that it was going to last for 45 days, but I can tell you I didn't remember on day 5 what I did on day 1 because it was such a fast-paced environment and so many things were happening at the same time, let alone remembering what happened on day 30 or day 32. So we try to write it down when we can to make sure that we're sharing that information. All right, here's some of your challenges, and this goes back to the question that was just asked, and as Dr. Aquila said, we're going to hold some of these questions till later. Hospitals are open to the public, and they are a safe haven. They're a safe environment. How do we control that while still maintaining an open, accessible environment? There is no one right answer. You can't have your patients come through magnetometers. You can't implement some of the security procedures, but there are some changes that you can make, and that's what we're going to talk about during our presence while we're here on the ground working with you guys. Hospital operations and critical care can't just stop. If you're performing a surgical operation on someone and a gunman comes running through the door, are you going to stop? Are you going to evacuate? What happens when a law enforcement officer is standing there saying to you as your patient is open on the table, you need to go? What are you going to do? Many of you aren't going to do anything, are you? You're going to keep doing what you have to do because you need to save that patient's life. And that's going to create a pretty tense moment for a minute. These are questions you need to start asking yourself. And Agent Kim and his counterparts are going to come up here and talk with you about some of those considerations. Okay? Hospital security personnel is solely responsible for all workplace safety and security. How many officers are at SUNY downstate at any particular moment? And security can't answer this. How many are here, guys? How many hospital police? 30? All of the above. Hospital police. We consider them armed and unarmed. That's how your operation works. How many are here, guys? Okay. Do we have hospital police in the room? You're back there, right? Okay. At any given moment, I will tell you there's less than 10. Think about this type of situation, and that will flux too based on the time of day. Think about this situation happening and how quickly your resources are going to be overwhelmed. And then you've got NYPD pouring in the doors from multiple locations, running down your hallways. Donnie talked about Ben Taub in Houston and the challenges that they faced, okay? So is hospital security solely responsible for all workplace and security and safety? No. You have an individual responsibility. And you owe it to yourself and your coworkers and your potential victims that are laying in those hospital beds to take those seriously. Think about what you would do. How do you secure a door that doesn't have a lock on it? You have oxygen tubing you can tie around handles. You have power cords, right? If the difference between saving my life and disabling a $5,000 machine is the power cord, you better believe I'm going to pull the power cord off the back of it and then make amends later on. There are different things in your environment right now that you could use to prevent time or to create time and distance between yourself and a perpetrator. These acts have shown that unless it is a targeted attack and they are looking for an individual, the more time and distance you can create between yourself and them will cause them to move on down the hall. And that's what we want, is you to take that seriously. If you have a belt on your waist and you tie it around the hinge to prevent the hinge from being able to open the door, that's another measure that you've taken to prevent yourself from becoming a victim. All right? We need to use emergency notification systems. Who needs to know what's going on? If you have an incident right now in your emergency room, does labor and delivery get the information? Does your cardiac intensive care unit get the information? Do they need the information? You can't hear shots fired regardless of where you are. You hear shots fired in one part of your facility, not everybody's hearing it. These are questions you need to ask. How quickly can we get the information out? What emergency notification measures do we have? Who's in charge of it? Who crafts the message to be sent out and shared with folks? What does the message say? Are we asking them to shelter in place, or are we asking them to evacuate immediately? Do we have a measure to account for them as they're going out the doors, pouring out the doors? Making sure we're keeping in mind that everybody carries 2 or 3 electronic devices these days. And in certain parts of your hospital, the coverage is really bad. I'm sure you guys have figured that out. So making sure we're sharing that. Multiple organizations are going to come out and support SUNY Downstate during their really bad day. They need information too in order to be proactive and lean forward and be able to help you with your response to the incident. Ensuring those folks, we have checklists here, depending on what it is. How are we sharing that information? Are we using an overhead paging system? In the event of an active shooter, do we have a code that we tell people? It's code silver. Or do we tell people we have an active shooter in the emergency room? These are plans, policies, and procedures that you need to have in place. You need to advertise these, and you need to train, plan, and exercise accordingly. All right? Developing the notification system. Making sure everybody's there. Do we tell folks, everybody come in, we need everybody and anybody? Or do we hold some in reserve so that when the first group gets really tired, we have another group that can come in and take care of them? We are all responders. We're used to going to the scene of an incident or the scene of a particular happening. In this instance, you need to go the other way. You need to go the other way until law enforcement tells you, come this way, we need your help, we need your specialized expertise. All right? Once something happens, how do we dispatch personnel? How do people get notified when to come or when to stay away? It's really hard for those of us that are used to being the people on scene, the go-to people, to pause. But you've got to pause in this particular incident, because your not pausing could cost you your life or somebody else's life. This is a dangerous scenario. It's a dangerous situation. You need to wait for guidance. It is really hard to see people on the other side of a door bleeding out and knowing that you have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to save their life. But until law enforcement can contain the threat and make sure that they're not going to take somebody else out, you've got to pause, let them do their jobs, and they're going to call you in and ask you to help. All right, we've already gone through a bunch of the studies. Donnie walked you through that. Is it happening in hospitals? It sure is. It's actually happening overseas as well. There have been some huge attacks in some other countries where multiple perpetrators will come in the hospital and attack from multiple angles, which is really hard to get your arms around. Is it something we need to be aware of? Unfortunately, it is. It's just a matter of time, folks. We've seen enough in our lifetimes to be able to say it's not a matter of if, but when. Bad things aren't supposed to happen, we know that, but they happen, and we owe it to ourselves and those that we take care of to be able to respond to it when it does happen. Here's your CMS requirements. We've talked about that. Are you prepared? Are you ready today? No? Is there any shame in admitting that? No, but you know what? You guys are light years ahead than some of the other hospitals and some of your counterpart agencies. It's one step at a time. It's one baby step towards one goal that at the end of the day may save one life or hundreds of lives, depending on what's going on. Okay? We do full-scale exercises like we're doing tomorrow. We're going to live stream that, so if you're not physically present, which many of you won't be, you can actually see what that looks like. We have some folks who come in, they're going to cause a ruckus in part of your hospital, and then we're going to have law enforcement come and respond. The focus of this exercise is not on the law enforcement response. We're not looking at SUNY downstate security to figure out, well, did they do that right, did they not? What we're doing is creating a realistic training environment for hospital police and hospital personnel to know what it looks like, how it's going to feel. What you think it is and what it actually is are sometimes 180 degrees different from each other. So that's the value of that. We walk through it, we bring in folks that look like that or some aspect that look like that because that's what they're going to look like when they come through the door. And as I said, everybody's a threat till nobody's a threat. And when you get these big burly guys standing in front of you and their adrenaline's pumping, you need to understand what that feels like on top of all the sights and sounds that are going on in concert with this. Making sure that we practice like we play is more important than you know. We send police officers to the gun range on a regular basis to practice drawing their weapons and shooting because in a real life incident, it's just second nature to them. Firefighters go out and drag hose and put up ladders because it's second nature. You need to make it second nature to yourself. Like Donnie said, thinking about where your exits are. How do I get out of here? If I have to barricade myself in my room right now, what do I have accessible to me to do that with? Okay? Take it seriously, folks. You might not ever get a second chance. It doesn't matter if you're here at SUNY Downstate or you're in the movie theater with your kids or in the grocery store shopping in the middle of the night. You need to have situational awareness on what's going on. Okay? At the end of the day, how does your hospital get back online? How do you go back? You should have a continuity of operations plan that identifies these pieces of it. How do we put it back together? Sometimes when a part of your hospital is taken out of commission because it's a crime scene, it could be 2 days, it could be 5 days. What about that? What kind of plans do we have in place to make sure everybody knows who is? What happens if some of our key personnel are taken out and they're the only ones that had all the information that we needed to have? We need to have a plan in place to make sure we know how to access that information. We're going to hold questions to the end. That is the end of my presentation. Our friends from the FBI are going to come up in a minute, and NYPD is here as well. I appreciate your time. Thank you for having us. We're truly honored, and we'll be in the back of the room if you have any questions.
So we're going to get a little bit more local now, and it's my honor to introduce Sergeant Tom Boyle from NYPD SHIELD and the Department of Counterterrorism Unit. Thank you, Sergeant.
Well, good morning. So I'm Sergeant Tom Boyle. As you just heard, I'm from the New York City Police Department. I work in the Counterterrorism Bureau, and specifically, I work for the NYPD SHIELD. Does anybody know what the NYPD SHIELD is? Any members here? Okay, a few. Any security directors here? Security personnel for the hospital? Awesome. So basically, what we are is we're a public partnership with the private sector. So we have 22 sectors in our organization, health and hospitals being one of them. What we do is training. We offer a website, and we speak about active shooter more intimately in your organization. We offer best practices information. What is best practices? So best practices basically is identified as a procedure that's been shown by research and experience, to produce optimal results in whatever situation, right? So as I said, we do sector-specific briefings. Our training, that's the heart of our organization. We come to you in a local area, and we train your staff and mostly your security personnel. We have a website and I'm going to go into that in a little while. It's a very useful website for any assessments and anything going on in the terror aspect of the world, really. So, like I said, we have 22 sectors. If you take a look up here, we are going to focus on health and hospitals today because obviously we're in that setting, right? Yeah. Training. So, like I said, this is our main focal point. We have a staff of 11 people in our unit. We have 17,000 SHIELD members in a city of anywhere from 8 to 10 million people. Of those 11 people in our unit, 7 of them are the cops and detectives that go out and do the training. We've trained, excuse me, in the last 10 years, over 85,000 people in the city. Some of our training that we do is our TASK program, which is terrorism awareness for the security professional. That's geared towards your security staff. It helps them recognize terror incidents, what to look for, what should you be looking at. We come out and we bring our props, we bring our fake explosives, we bring our fake bombs and tell them to look for that, the wires coming out of a bag with a clock attached to it. We offer the vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, car bombs, all right? So that's for organizations that have their own parking attendants and parking garages. Detecting hostile surveillance. What to look for if somebody's watching you or your organization. I went out recently to a venue for theater performers, and a great example of hostile surveillance that we never really encountered, but it was an eye-opener, was a stalker coming to a theater, and there's a particular star that they're enamored with or that they feel wants them there because they love them. So it's again, it could be specific to anything. Recommendations for active shooter incident. That's our most popular course, and that's one of the only ones that's open to all staff of an organization. The reason it's open to everybody is it's quite obvious. A bullet does not discriminate. If you're the CEO or one of the volunteers at the hospital, it doesn't matter, right? You could be a target. So we give our recommendations. Anybody here ever attend one of our active shooter classes? I know Miles is here, and he's been to plenty of them. If you've ever been to them, if you've never been to them, you should. Like I said, we come to you if you're local in New York or outlying areas. We have a few others that are more selected towards specific organizations. Suspicious mail and packages, if you have a mail room, not everybody does, and some of the other ones. We have a website. So our website has briefings on anything that happens around the world. Right now, over in England, there's a situation going on outside the Parliament building with an active hostile participant over there. So that'll play out. We'll have a briefing on that can be downloaded and read. We also have in our website prior assessments. So if you want to look up, the Madrid bombing or the Pulse nightclub shooting, we have assessments on that. So it's a great library of information to have. The website there is the nypdshield.org. If you're a security professional administrator of the hospital, we welcome you to join, to log on, fill out a small, short application, and join. It's geared towards the law enforcement professionals, the security directors, security personnel, and the administrators of your organizations. Every 2 weeks, we put a video, a short video of some of our analysts. We have, we call them T-tag analysts, terror threat analysts, that basically sit down and do a presentation of what's going on around the world, in the world of terror. And oddly enough, it's called Around the World. So every 2 weeks we put that out, and we archive all of them. So if you want to watch some of the other ones, you can definitely do that. So our training leads to an organization doing a tabletop exercise. So a tabletop is basically, it's not something we did by design, but more by request, and it's really taken off lately, and we do a lot of them. So an organization will bring in their major players in the organization, from the heads of administration, their human resources, all their major departments, and they'll sit down and they'll talk through a situation. What happens if John Doe comes in because he's upset, he just got fired, walks in the front door, starts shooting? What are we doing? So we sit down and we talk through that. We always meet up beforehand. We go over some of the parameters. Then we have usually a very nice tabletop discussion about it. What follows the tabletop is what you guys are doing tomorrow, the live drill. You guys have a pretty extensive live drill scheduled for tomorrow. I'm actually pretty excited to come over and see it. It should be pretty good. The hospitals, the interactions with the police department. You know, I see there's a lot of doctors, nurses here. In the hospitals in New York City, you see cops all the time, right? Sometimes you're like, what are they doing here? Why are they in my way? And I've been a city cop for a long, long time, and always dealing with what our task is and your task is. Sometimes they clash. So for the most part, you're going to see, especially in a city hospital or a trauma center, you're going to see cops guarding injured prisoners, right? They're under arrest, but we need to be there watching them. Motor vehicle accidents, large-scale accidents and disasters, you're going to see a lot of us. An injured cop, a cop gets shot, God forbid, you're going to see all of us. You know, we come in, you know, anybody who's been in a hospital where a cop was brought in, you're going to see a gigantic police presence there. And then, you know, you also see them when the cops come over to interview domestic violence, psychiatric patients, missing persons. Psychiatric is another area that is touched upon between hospital personnel and police. It's in one area of a hospital inside a psychiatric secured facility where the hospital staff will tell the police officer to disarm himself. It's a one and only place we will. So it's its own unique dynamic, and sometimes you see some of the newer cops that come in and they don't understand this, and whoa, you think I'm going to unarm myself? It sometimes takes some getting used to by some of the newer guys, and some clashes sometimes happen. So what we like to do is collaborate with all the hospital staff. We've been doing that for years, and we try to diffuse any tensions that sometimes come about. Some of the coordination with the staff and the problems that some police and other members of the emergency services units out there, the fire and other medical, is miscommunication. Example I just said with the psychiatric ward. The lack of information about a prisoner. I thought he was over there. I thought he was over there. HIPAA laws don't really bother us too much because we're not looking for any, pertinent information that's covered. We just need, who are you? Why are you here? stuff like that. Hospital layout is big, though. You know, you walk into a hospital, and in New York, some of these hospitals are gigantic. So when you ask, hey, I'm looking for patient so-and-so, what room is he in? Oh, he's in room 412. Oh, thank you. That's on the 7th floor. What? So even going from an emergency room to an x-ray, if you're told, oh, that patient went over to x-ray, you don't know where that is. So, you know, we always encourage our hospitals, our local hospitals, to coordinate with the local precinct so that when the police do go in there, they have a good idea of where to go. So that's our coordination. And now the biggest fear, as we've been talking about today, is that big incident at a hospital, the active shooter. What happens then, right? So, okay, you have your active shooter now. Now what are you doing, right? So I'm going to go into just a very, very short, because I know we're running behind on time, but a very short overview of what's going to happen at your hospital, okay? So an active shooter, the first thing that happens is, well, the cops are coming, right? And in New York City, you don't get a few cops, you get a whole lot of cops, right? So the cops are going to come over. Their task is to neutralize the threat. So when you're in the hospital and there's an active shooter, you're going to want to get out. That's your first thought, is to get out of the scene. So Department of Homeland Security uses a run, hide, fight. We in the New York City Police Department like to change things up because we're the New York City Police Department. We use the ABCs, the avoid, barricade, and confront. And the only reason we do that is because the second aspect of that acronym, the run, hide, fight, is we don't think that hide is robust enough. So we like to use the avoid, barricade, and confront, because barricade is a lot different than hiding. The previous presentation was pretty funny how the little girls hiding behind the drapes and whatnot. And humor is great, but in all honesty, it's not going to do any good. So barricading is what we like to enforce in our training. Our training definitely goes into what you can use in any office setting, hospital setting, no matter where you work. There's always things that you could use to barricade yourself in. We have a short video, I'm not going to play it today, but in our training, that shows the different penetration levels of common office furniture from a couple of different guns, a 38, a 9mm, and I'm sorry, 4 different guns, a 38, a 9mm, a shotgun, and an AK-47. And the thing that everybody takes out of that, and if you've taken the class, you'll see, the thing that everybody takes out of that is like, wow, that simple move of taking that file cabinet packed with all those papers and putting it up against a door could save your life, because the bullet will be embedded, hopefully, in that barricade. So that's why we changed some of our things. So you're going to get chaos out of your hospital, right? You're coming out, and when you come out, you're always going to have your hands up, out, and free of any material in your hands, right? We always go over that, and I definitely encourage you. How many different hospitals are here? Is everybody here from SUNY Downstate or different? So, all right, awesome. I definitely encourage all your hospitals to get in contact with us and take our training. So when you go out, you're responsible for not only yourself. Hospitals and schools are our toughest assignments, because you're not just caring for yourself, you're caring for others. You guys have patients, the schools have their children. What are you going to do? You're going to leave your patients? Maybe. You never know. You don't know how the mind reacts when this happens. but for the most part, you want to get your patients out of there. So you're going to take them out into the street. You're going to take them out into a secure area. You're going to maybe take them into a different wing of a building if your hospital's large enough, until that threat is over. So you're going to have a congestion outside your hospital. This is from that previous unfounded hospital shooting from a little while ago. And then you're going to have crowds. You're going to have pedestrian traffic. You're going to have police traffic, EMS traffic. You're going to have traffic. You're going to have a lot of traffic. So what do you do with all this? You're going to have confusion. You're going to have chaos. You're going to have, oh my God, what is going on here? The threat stopped now, right? Let's go forward, and now that the police have come in and they have stopped your threat. It doesn't stop your situation. So how many hospital administrators are here? So you guys have a very non-envious job right now, because you have to put all the pieces back together. You're going to lose your hospital. You're in New York City. Who's taking over your hospital? We are. Your hospital is now, for the most part, depending on the size of the incident, your hospital is a crime scene. Your ER, if you have one ER in your hospital and it was affected by the incident, you don't have an ER now. You're transporting your hospital patients to other facilities. You have who's coming to this incident also that we didn't really talk about today? The media, right? They're going to swarm on your hospital. Family of any patient is going to come over here. And when the fire department and the police department and every other department is over there, and the mayor is on the way and the police commissioner is on their way, that's what the streets are going to look like. Getting over here, Clarkston Avenue, Lenox, it's not that easy on a regular day with no traffic. It's not even easy on a Sunday with no traffic. So can you imagine what kind of confusion you're going to have after an incident? So your hospital now is on shutdown. You're going to have public relations obstacles. You're going to have CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all speaking about your hospital. After the initial threat, because in the world of 24-hour news networks, they have to find something else to talk about. So let's go to this over here. Well, what did they do beforehand to mitigate this threat? Do you want that kind of public relations? No, nobody does. You could get bad press, depending on, it's like a Yelp review. One guy's not happy and he speaks out, and that may not necessarily be the truth. So you gotta learn to mitigate that. You know, we talk about loss of business continuity. In your case, that's life and death continuity, because your patients are in here for a reason. They need health care. So these are all the things that now you're tasked with taking care of. And it could be a very long time till you get back up and back to staff. You have, after an incident, family coming, you need to set up an off-site location for them. You have media rooms, public speaking by the mayor, the PC, or FBI director, anybody else that may be coming. These are all tasks that will linger for a long time after your 9 to 15-minute incident that happened, that many of you may never have even been aware that it was going on while it was going on, because as we've said earlier, these things, they just happen like that. And it's over usually before most people know about it. So this is all why we go back to best practices, because the more we talk about it, the more we think about it, the better we'll be able to refine and hone in on our best practices. What you need to think about is what everybody needs to think about in a hospital setting. We do fire drills, schools do lockdown procedures, but I don't see many people doing active shooter drills where, you're making a decision, one of three decisions: avoid, barricade, or confront, a shooter or a hostile individual. So that's what you have to grapple with for your corporation, your hospital. So I know the questions are going to be held off to the end, so I thank you very much. Our motto is, if you see something, say something. Please join our organization at nypd.org, nypdshield.org. Thank you very much.
All right, now at this point we have a kind of a tag team coming up and the first will be Special Agent Jin Kim for the role of the FBI in an active shooter event, and then the Supervisory Special Agent Andrew Peckman for Long Island Joint Counterterrorism Task Force, and Special Agent Kathy Van de Schriel, I don't think I said that right. Thank you very much. Is also going to be here, so that you have about 40 minutes, so you're not in a big rush. Okay.
Am I starting now?
You can start now.
Okay, good. All righty.
All right, so good morning. Honored to be here. First and foremost, I'm humbled to be in an audience full of such distinguished people like yourself. But first, thank the people here at Johnson for inviting us. In the end, it's their fault. Their fault with me. Okay. First and foremost, what I'd like to do is tell you my background. Good, good, good. So you go. Awesome. Most important takeaway of this is I'm 12 months from retirement, and yes, until then, you can hire me. Make me louder. That makes sense, right? Okay, so here we go. A couple housekeeping things. I do not have all the answers. I know what you may think about the FBI. Oh yeah, they think they have all the answers. I certainly don't. Maybe those two people do, but I certainly don't, nor do I claim to be. I'm not here to affect or change anything that you do. You guys get paid the big bucks to do that. Me, my objective for the next 15 minutes is just probably provide more questions to you than I have answers. Please do not record any portion of me or them, and if you do, we will find you. I promise you that. Now, selfies. Young people born before 1990, knock yourselves out, okay? We're good? Awesome. Those are the rules. Okay. What I want to do is set the tone. Up for grabs a handy dandy cover for your helmet holder, brand spanking new, I think. All right, this does not stand for FBI. This stands for something else, okay? And I'm not going to tell you what. Maybe there's a prize at the end of it. But win this, okay? So all you need to do is just name what movie this is from. I'm going to give you a hint. Just yell it out. Please do not raise your hand. Don't embarrass yourself, okay? We good? All right, just raise it up. Here's your hint. Got it? We're going to set the tone. What you do in life echoes in eternity. Who said that? What movie? Who said that? Who said what? Who said Gladiator? Gladiator. Opening scene. Did you see that? You understand that's the greatest love story ever depicted on film. It has nothing to do with war. You know, this is what happens when you kill someone's wife, right? And his family. They go gladiator on you. Okay, so that's the tone. What you do in life. You are a room of doers. And my hat is off to you. Continue to do. What I've learned over the 22 years I've been in the Bureau, there'll be 23 soon, is this. Once you start doing, and you have a long road ahead of you when it comes to something serious like this, the doing doesn't stop. It stops when you retire. But someone else is going to pick that up. Because once you think you're there, life doesn't stop. The doing will continue. So this is all about doing. All right, so what I want to do is just quickly review the 6 instances that we've had, that we've documented in the FBI report that we put out a couple of years ago. So just quickly for your information. Now, take a look. Again, still holds true. The 2 places that 3/4 of the events, they took place is education and work. SUNY Downstate is what? Teaching hospital, right? You've won the double whammy here. NYU Medical Center, double whammy there, and so on and so on. So please understand where these are numbers and the numbers don't lie. How about this? Take a look at the casualty rate. Now you've seen we start documenting since year 2000. I have the numbers for 14 and 15. That ends at 13. Where do you think that line continues to go? Across, down, or up? Yeah, you're all educated people. You watch the news, it all goes up. And again, you see what's going on, and we have an event going on right now overseas right now at the Parliament. Violence is not going to end. I'm sorry. In this country, living in 2017, moving forward, I'm not sure we're ever going to see an end of it. Just an FYI. Okay, so take a look specifically. All of this stuff is on FBI.gov. Go on active shooter, and you can download all this information. But they're just numbers and stats, and you know what? Numbers and stats are exactly that, numbers and stats. I pulled healthcare facilities. We counted six instances over the last 16 years. 6. Only 6. That's good news. But I'll tell you this right now, that only accounts for the active shooter events that we classify as active shooter. There's been tons of hospital shootings that did not make this report. But still, violence is violence. So take a look at this. All male shooters, you have 2 that were 30 years, in their 30s, 2 in their 40s, and 2 in their 50s. All male shooters, 2 in their 40s. So that's a lot of people. That, a lot of us in that match that description right now. Take a look at this. As far as how those incidents end, 2 by suicide, 1 by police deadly force, and 3 were apprehended, and 1 apprehended by people on the scene that were not law enforcement. Okay, so take a look at how these escalate. Understand this matrix here. There is always a grievance inside that perpetrator's head that frankly is unreasonable and disconnected to the rest of us, the vast majority of us, wouldn't you not say? They're planned attacks, but there's always a reason inside that person's head that makes them decide, oh yeah, today I'm going there and I'm going to start killing people. It's simple as that. We have no control over that. You have no control over their ideation or how they research and prepare. You don't know it. Planning, these are planned events. They take time, they multiply. And again, breach. Let's talk about breach. You can have internal, external threats. It could be someone from the outside that does not belong there, nor have access there, that decides to walk in and create chaos into your institution. Or it's a workplace violence issue. It's someone who's had enough of their boss, or the chief of staff, or the head RN, and you get the point, right? They say today's the day, it ends today. The madness ends today in their head. So, the attack, and that's what we're here for, is again, all to survive the attack. All right, so let's take a look at the first one. All right, so 2009, rehab center. So this maniac goes ahead, 45-year-old male, goes in, kills 8, wounds 3. Anyone remember this event? Yeah, take a look. He was looking for his wife. So it was the domestic that's gone bad. She worked at that location, looking for his wife to do bad things to that wife. She wasn't there, so he winds up killing other people. He gets shot. What do you think his grievance was? Why in his head do you think he did something like that, decided to go there? It's a domestic. That problem landed in your facility. They had no choice about that. Take a look at Knoxville. What happened there? Killed 1, wounded 2. Right? This guy was upset about a recent surgery that he had. So he went there looking for his physician to address, hey, I'm not so happy about what happened, right? So what does he wind up doing? He thought, what? There was a microchip implanted inside of his body. Do you think you're dealing with a reasonable person at that time? Do you think when they sign consent to say, yeah, do surgery to help me? You're going to do what, a mental health eval on them? Do you do mental health evals on everyone? No, you don't. So you don't really know who you're dealing with. Okay, so what did he do? Went into the emergency department and started shooting the place up. What do you think his grievance was? Yeah, he was crazy. Is that a clinical term? Do I have anyone like that? Yeah? Okay, good. All right, how about this? Take a look what happened. Now, this did not make our report because this was actually categorized under education. But this is a medical center. This maniac goes in, right? Former grad student who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. That's a very bad treatment right there. So he was upset with all the staff, all the doctors, and what's he want to do? Goes into the lobby and shoots poor secretary standing right there, the greeter, shoots her right point blank in the chest. She was the first one to get it. And then went ahead and attacked. So again, planned it for months. That stewed in his head. He had made the decision prior to planning. Remember that, guys. These are not passion, crimes of passion. They're very deliberate, planned events. What do you think his grievance was? Yeah, crazy. How about this one right here, Alabama? Take a look at this one. So, I think they already touched on this. He was upset about his wife's care. So he goes in, not happy with the staff, at 0:30 in the morning, decides, goes out, gets a gun, then comes back into his unit, goes ahead, briefly, a security guard encounters him. He held the security guard hostage for a little bit. He struggled away. He went ahead and did his killing there. What do you think his grievance was? Now, I know the skeleton crew. Unfortunately, I'm going to share something personally with you. The last year of my life, I spent a lot of time in hospitals with my family member. But here's the deal. I've learned a lot. I became a resident expert in hospital security just as an outsider, spending the last year of my life in hospitals. I can tell you this right now. I've been there at 0 dark 30 inside of a room with literally maybe 2 nurses around and no one else in sight. I can tell you this right now. If this happened at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, what do you think would have happened to that body count? Woohoo! Way up, right? Okay. Take a look at this one. All right, so this one happened right here. Take a look at this one in Reno, Nevada. Vasectomy is what caused this problem. That was the trigger, but he was like the other patient, upset. He suffered from depression, right? He went in with multiple weapons. Not just, I'm going to go grab my handgun and I'm going to go do something bad. What's he wind up doing? He came in with a shotgun, an AR, and what? A handgun. That is a guy who has decided, I am going to war and I'm going to create chaos and bring a lot of death and mayhem to this people in this institution because of what they've done over that. He left a manifesto. And you know what that manifesto read? That hospital was hell on earth. Those people were all evil. They did this to me. That person blamed you. You as an institution. What's going on inside their head, right? Do you have control over what's going on inside their head? You don't. There's a lot that you do not have control over. Please understand that. Okay, take a look at this one. I don't live too far from here. I remember the day that this happened. So a guy goes in, right? He's being treated for severe depression. His caseworker sits right next to him. Okay, he's agitated. Pulls out his .38. Bam! Executes you at point blank range. I'm sorry. Do you want to hit me? Are you sure? Okay. I would understand if you wanted to, okay? My apologies. So, and then he pursues to get into a gunfight across the desk with his psychiatrist right there. He had a permit to carry. Returns fire. He gets hit, he returns fire, and he goes ahead, and then they subdue him. Can that happen in your institution? No, can't happen there, no. Okay, so take a look at this one. So this is the most recent one, Planned Parenthood, right? So this maniac goes in because of what? Whatever's going inside, so starts a gunfight outside, starts shooting people in a parking lot, right? They escape, and now all hell breaks loose. He goes in, barricades himself, get multiple gunfights, and unfortunately, there were more than one officer, there were a couple officers that were killed in this event. So, what do you think his grievance was? This shocked me when he said he was a warrior for babies and doing this on God's behalf, which is why he attacked Planned Parenthood. Just understand that. He thought we were following him. Wasn't me. I only got blown once on the surveillance, okay? It was embarrassing. But that wasn't me. We were not following, but it was inside of his head, right? So what do you think his grievance was? Yeah, he was crazy. So take a look at these other events, though. These other events. These shootings. This one I want to bring up to you. Brigham's, right there. This one happened not too long ago, where a former patient went in, looked for Dr. Davidson. Dr. Davidson stops, he turns, bam! Killed him right then and there, right there in the hallway of the wing. Could that happen in your institution? Yeah, unfortunately it can. So, take a look at these triggers. I'm going to share these triggers for you. Look at this. Relationship loss, humiliation, rejection, aka bullying, change of financial status, life, job. Were these not triggers what caused these 6 events that we have in our report? Absolutely. History is very telltale, but here's the deal looking forward. That violent extremism, that what someone believes in, social, political, religious cause, that is a very, very, very strong motivator. In my opinion, I see institutions preparing for that, and that's a real threat. Has not happened yet in a healthcare environment, and I hope it never does. But you talk about the full spectrum from a what? A domestic gone bad to now you've got to prepare for Al-Qaeda to attack your facility. Right? That's a big spectrum to cover. That's why I think you have a challenging job. So here, I'm going to leave you with this. The famous words of Shakespeare. Is what is past is prologue? So those 6 events that happened that had to be managed, put yourself or your institution in those 6 events that happened. How would you have managed it? Could you have managed it? Would you have recovered? How fast you would have recovered? That's history, and that's fact. Can it happen again? Absolutely. Can a crazy person, I know it's not a legitimate clinical term, walk into your hospital and start shooting it up? Absolutely, without a doubt. Then there is the past. Now, as far as what is the future, you're the room full of doers. That doing never stops. We here at the FDR, please use us as a resource. Because here, take a look at it. We have all of these reports out there. This is a pretty good one that the medical chiefs put out. I've read them all. They're all good. Does it all apply to you? I think you can nitpick to all of them and pick and choose what applies to you because you know what applies to you and you make the big decision of what applies to you. So just remember, I showed you those incidents just to give you a little detail of what has already happened in this country that we've classified as an active shooter event. But shootings still continue and they will continue probably to happen without a doubt. So that's my time. That's me. I'm on LinkedIn. I do a 75-minute presentation called Active Shooter, Acute Threat, Survival Strategies. I've been here before. I've heard people complain about me before, so not the first day. But just, again, I'm giving you my contact information. You only have me for 12 more months. Then you got to pay, right? Going rate, whatever that is. All right? So just understand, I'm going to turn it over to the pros, and they're going to really tell you about how we react. Thanks, guys.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be very brief because everything that the FBI would ask of you has entirely been covered in the presentations that have preceded me. So I don't even need to be here, but I'm happy to be here and I'm appreciative of the invite. My name is Andrew Packman. I am the supervisor for the Long Island Joint Terrorism Task Force. I spent the last 10 years working in the New York City office in Chelsea. Just got transferred to Long Island 6 months ago, and lucky for me because I happen to live in Long Beach, so life is good. Again, nothing I could say could better reinforce what you guys have already been told. As you know, the FBI would not be the first ones on scene. But once we're there, if the threat hasn't been neutralized or eliminated, we'll be part of that fight. If there's a suspicious car that's been cordoned off, we'll have Special Agent Bomb Techs assisting with the NYPD's explosives unit to try to render that device safe. If there's a suspicious package inside the hospital, same thing. We'll do what we can to render the device safe. If there's an active shooter, as we've been talking about this morning, we'll join the fight, we'll aggressively get in there and eliminate the threat. That's what we'll be there to do until the threat is eliminated. Now, once the threat's eliminated, what will happen next? Well, the investigation will begin, and depending if we have a guy in custody, we have a dead shooter, or we have a guy at large, will dictate what we do next. But what can you expect from the FBI at your facility? Well, we'll come in with our mobile command post. It's a RV-sized vehicle with all the bells and whistles, a 12-foot antenna, computers that connect to every database, internal and external, that the FBI has. We'll need a place to park that. Hopefully you'll help us find a good spot to park it. We'll operate out of there. We'll have our shift changes out of there. We'll have briefings every 8 hours or every 12 hours with all the agencies who are present to discuss what has been accomplished and what will be accomplished in the next shift upcoming. We'll also bring in our evidence response team. We have special agents who are trained to collect and identify evidence that's outside of their normal duties, investigating whatever crimes and squads that they're assigned to. We'll do all those things. What would we ask from you? Preserve, 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 and exactly what we've been told here. Access to your floor plans, as was discussed. Access to your security cameras, which has been discussed. And importantly, helping us locate and identify witnesses, which hasn't been mentioned. Whether it's visitors, family members of patients, employees, anyone who may be a witness or of value to the investigation would be important to us. Because the attack may have occurred here, but it was overwhelmingly likely planned elsewhere. There may be co-conspirators or other attackers elsewhere. So that's where we'll begin our investigation and work off of here, bring our resources to your front door to help you guys hopefully keep everyone safe. And that's all I got. Thank you very much.
So we have some time for questions and panel discussion. So if the speakers could please come sit up in the chairs. You push the button in order for you to be heard. We would really really like for you to spread the word as much as possible and a community outreach spirit, you know, take it to your church, tell the Girl Scouts, maybe not all the lectures, you know, and really spread the word, because I think that, you know, our community becomes more prepared and safer the more our community knows. So, and I want to take an opportunity, because I know some people are coming and going, people have clinics they have to get to and things like that, but I really want to ask you for a round of applause for all of the speakers today. So, are there any questions? Just we can say, yes.
We had a program at Downstate several years ago called Doctors Against Murder, DAM. And we went out to schools to prevent this kind of things that can happen in a hospital also. They had metal detectors in these schools. I didn't hear you speak about any medical detectors in this hospital or in the hospital before all of this takes place. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But DAM worked well, and we caught a lot. Do you know how many knives and guns were carried into the school every single day? We have no control over all these hospitals. Right here, we have hospitals. People get angry at anything. The way doctors talk, the way the receptionists talk, and things like this. And yet we have no protection against their ability to start that whole thing going. So my question is, should we have medical detectors in hospitals?
So I just want to remember and to remind everyone that the opinions of the people here are their personal opinions. They don't stand for any governmental agency on as far as an opinion about metal detectors. But I'm very interested.
So I'm going to defer to law enforcement on that.
So, a metal detector is
I think you have to push the button,
No,
Andrew. Nope.
maybe that one.
You got me now? All right. So a metal detector is absolutely a strong deterrent, and it's a deterrent for those who might want to bring stuff in, and it's great at catching those who do. It also affects on the negative side, it affects the image of the facility as a dangerous place that many times directors would not want to project. So I understand the balance that you would have to strike there when determining whether or not to employ one, but in terms of safety, metal detector, especially when you have incidents that can demonstrate the benefit it would provide, I would absolutely recommend having a metal detector maybe in the ER visitors area or wherever the members of the public would enter that might go either undetected or sort of off the radar from the main entrance. So I would support it.
So I also want to give a big plug for Doctors Against Murder, and I know Ray Austin did it for many years, and many people from the emergency department participated in it at Kings County and at Downstate, and Robert Gore's gone on to create CAVI, which is Kings County Against Violence, and those are wonderful outreach programs that are fantastic, and we're very honored to have anybody who started that program here, so thank you.
Yeah. I'm Dr. Robert Kurtz. I was for many years Director of Service for Trauma and Surgical Critical Care across the street, which is our busiest level 1 trauma center in the city. But I'm going to tell you about an incident that happened maybe 30 years ago in the 80s at the Bronx VA, which was affiliate of Sinai, where I was. One of our doctors, the nephrologist, was shot by an angry patient who had already showed up 3 months before with a cutlass and threatened people, but was still roaming the streets, came in with a .357 Magnum, shot a doctor and a nurse. Why the doctor didn't sue the federal government after that for not having apprehended this guy and done more, I don't know. The only arrangement he made with them was that they would put up metal detectors at the hospital. And I guess they were less concerned probably than people would be now about bad marketing presentations and so forth. What they confiscated with those metal detectors was beyond belief. They after about a year, they filled 3 full, probably 7 or 8 feet tall glass display cases with everything imaginable. They had submachine guns, sawed-off shotguns, all sorts of pistols, canes with swords in them. So if that was deterring people, I hate to see what those who would go in without deterrence would have brought. I don't frankly know that we could do this today. but it left no one in any illusions about the kinds of weapons that people carry when they come in the hospital. We had somebody come in with a gun across the street a few years ago and threatened me personally. Fortunately, he didn't shoot. He discarded the magazine on the way out, and when finally the police came, they realized he was smart enough to make sure he didn't get arrested with a loaded gun, which is a felony, and with an unloaded one, a misdemeanor.
I'd like to make one other comment about having metal detectors. So I agree with the idea that I think metal detectors are great deterrents, and that we should, as hospital systems, should consider. I know down south in Texas where I work, it's been something that's been on the table, discussed for some years now. The argument for is obviously deterrence, and I wish we had them in our ED, and to this date we still don't. But the argument against them has been, one, the idea of perception. Well, it makes it look like a dangerous place. Maybe so, but maybe people are willing to put up with that kind of public appearance at this point, given what we're seeing with the crescendo of these type of incidents. The other thing, though, is the argument that, well, you know, metal detectors are only as good as they can be staffed. So it is true that you need to have a robust enough department or security department, police department, to be able to man those and do something about it should there be weapons identified. So which adds to cost. So that's another argument against just throwing that out there. But I think that they would be, it's something that should, at least in our level 1 trauma centers, should be something that should be implemented.
Hi. I'm not part of the hospital. I'm actually a faculty member here in the university. So, and I know most of this is related to hospital practice. And you've touched on, obviously, a lot of things that would apply to the university as well. But I'm wondering if there's other things that are particular to a university or an educational setting as opposed to a hospital setting that might be slightly different at all. If you could comment on that, or if Agent Kim could comment at all on the amount and the frequency of attacks on college campuses.
College campuses are high. I don't have the exact number in front of me as far as the last 15 years, but all of them have the most lethal and then the highest rate that they have. You just look at what happened in Virginia Tech, and that's telling. So what I think when you have an open campus, open facility like the way you're working, that's also a workplace. The key to this and why you're there is education. I think during this, if you do not train your staff, at least in a video, WebEx, or some type of training, hey, take a look at this, be informed, because in the end, your survival will always come down to you and your choices that you make. The lockdown that a lot of institutions use is an institutional response. It may not, fit or work for everyone, and you have to understand and be realistic about that. So there have been some people that claim a successful lockdown has never, ever took place in the United States yet, but it's still widely used, which is why I am a proponent of educating your staff, your people, and your students by bringing in NYPD Shield. They do it for free. You can bring me in, you can bring in Global 7. It's worth the investment, because now there are mandates now that the government's putting out, not by the FBI, but the other government agencies are now mandating. And again, OSHA has been that OSHA mandate, as depending on how you read into it, that's been around for a while. But I think now what's probably going to happen is you're going to wait for the first lawsuit, because the lawsuit that just happened with the real cinema, the civil shooting out of Colorado, that lawsuit has just been settled. People are walking away with money from it. And frankly, I don't know how liable they were for a maniac to make entry into that shoot place up. But I think, until people realize, hey, you may be held liable, and financially, maybe that'll help wake people up. But education, training, like anything else, that's the key to surviving these events. Moving forward,
My name is Ian Taylor. In a previous life, I was Dean at Tulane when Hurricane Katrina struck, and a second disaster for us was the failure of DHS and FEMA. It's only after the disaster we found out that experienced, well-trained emergency personnel were replaced by political cronies who had no experience, no training. Are there any rules now where the federal government has to appoint experienced people into those key positions? Was anything learned by that disaster?
Right, so if you'll remember, immediately post-Hurricane Katrina, prior to Hurricane Katrina, a lot of the emergency response folks were patronage, political appointees. It doesn't matter when you get to that level, it's not much of an impact, and we saw clearly there was a huge impact on emergency response. Since then, the two subsequent FEMA administrators have both been emergency practitioners. So the last one that just left was the state of Florida emergency management director who'd done numerous hurricanes, had practical experience, et cetera. I would assume, because we have so many disasters that occur in this country on a regular basis, that we will continue that trend to bring in the qualified and capable persons as opposed to the political appointees who paid the right amount of money to the right amount of people. So we've certainly seen that trend. Unfortunately, our business is very cyclical. The further we get away from a disaster, the more likely we are to forget the lessons that we learned from that. Fortunately and unfortunately, we stay pretty busy in the disaster response business. So I don't see that trend changing anytime soon. There were a lot of problems generated based on the experiences that you addressed. People just didn't know what they didn't know. I have no doubt they were doing the best that they could with what they had. But unfortunately, if you just don't have the experience and the skills and abilities, you just can't manage an incident correctly and appropriately.
Hi, my name is Donna Nicolino. I'm a licensed clinical social worker from Brooklyn Plaza Medical Center in Fort Greene. And I'm curious to get your expert opinions on the idea that, that more citizens carrying firearms would actually be a help in these situations or a deterrent.
So again, I will defer to law enforcement. I will tell you in the state of Texas, we actually have open carry laws. So it's not common to see it, which has been actually pretty interesting. We were having this conversation that now that they can, they don't seem to want to. It's when you can't that they seem to choose to. Knock on wood, we don't seem to have a lot of the same challenges in the state that some of our counterparts do that have different laws than we do. But I will certainly defer to law enforcement for their expert opinions.
That's a great question. Should we have more guns on the street? Yeah, so the open carry states and the open concealed states boggle my mind sometimes. Walking into a restaurant with a gun, an AK-47 hanging off your hip, to me, you know, and this is coming from somebody who carries a gun 24 hours a day. The problem is sometimes perception. The guns that are out on the streets in this area and areas all over the city are not the licensed legal guns, the ones that are killing our youth, our citizens, our neighbors. They are unfortunately ones that are sold and bought on the black market and are used for illegal means. They're not used for the most part, although I'd say some of them probably are. They're not used for home protection. They may be used for business protection, but if that business is illegal in the first place, that kind of, you know, negates that. I don't have a strong opinion, personal, on whether we should have more licensed gun holders. However, I would, as a cop for almost a quarter of a century, I would much rather see a licensed gun holder than, somebody carrying an illegal firearm.
And then, no, it's okay. Actually, he was next. It's fine. I saw you.
I just wanted to kind of make a kind of thought that was going on in my head when you guys mentioned that it's a negative connotation that it brings about to an institution to have a metal detector or any sort of preventive measures. But if you go to an airport, and does the airport now have negative connotation? And I'm sure there's other places that have certain preventive measures in place to, stop and deter all this from happening. So whether, I don't know, for me it didn't make sense that it would bring a negative connotation. So that's just something.
Do you mind?
So it is a policy level decision. It's up to the the policymakers for SUNY downstate. But I will tell you a recent statistic that came out in the last couple of years at airports: less than 50% of the prohibited items that go through security are actually found. And you know how in-depth the security is at aviation and airports around this country. Less than 50% are found. People who want to do you harm are going to find a way around your system. Unfortunately, we have folks who show up with really sometimes no intent of doing harm, and then something happens and triggers them, like Agent Kim was talking about. But it's an interesting statistic, given the level of security that exists around aviation these days.
If I could just touch on that also. The problem with the, are you a physician here? Okay, if you're a physician here and you have metal detectors in your front lobby, should you go through it? Will you go through it?
Not my experience.
The practice is, well, I'm the chief of physicians here. I don't need to go through that metal detector. I'm the chief of nurse or the head of nursing. I'm this, I'm that. So there's going to be exceptions to the rule. The other problem with the metal detectors is, we deal and we teach about this all the times in different organizations. You have Fortune 500 companies that are in public buildings, and the buildings are open to the public, but they need a sense of security. So there's always a question, the sense of security versus your right to a free movement without being obstructed. The feeling that you shouldn't have to be searched everywhere you go. If you're being searched when you go into the hospital, then you leave the hospital and you go into work and you're being searched, and then you catch a flight and you're going onto the airport and you're being searched. That is a mindset. And, in this country right now, we have the mindset that I have the freedom to go where I want to go and where I have to go. In an airport setting, you're not getting onto a plane, right, unless you get searched. Are you going to be told, well, you're not coming into a hospital because you didn't get searched? It's something that this country needs to grapple with. I'll give you a quick story. A few years ago, we were escorting a delegation from Israel, and we took them to a play in Manhattan. And when we went in, they were astounded, absolutely astounded, that they weren't searched. They couldn't understand how they were going into a large theater setting without anybody being searched. And some of them got a little bit antsy because they didn't feel comfortable. But that's the mindset over there. It's not the mindset here. So a lot of it has to do with mindset.
Regarding the open carry issue that we discussed with the previous speaker, isn't it true that the states that have open carry permits have had twice as many active shooter incidences?
Okay, so the question was, is it true that the states that have open carry laws, I'm sorry if I can get the words right, have actually more documented active shooter events? I don't know those statistics.
You got it, pal.
I'd have to call ATF, and run the numbers. I'm not sure the Bureau tracks that. I could probably... Your burger showed that. I said, I don't think, the Bureau track that? Did that Bureau
No, I showed a slide that, with the, was it the slide you're referring to, the how they ended, active shooter incidents ended?
So you extrapolate that the Northeast has the fewest, and the Northeast has the fewest open carry laws, that's a big extrapolation. Okay. I think somebody's looking it up in the back.
Those were specific to hospitals, and they weren't necessarily active shooters. They were shootings inside or on hospital property.
Okay.
Hi, Dr. Schreiber, one of the physicians here. First, I'd like to say the presentation was outstanding. Thank you all. A little bit on the coattails of your previous two questions. as far as legal gun ownership, for places like this, why, or is there any resistance from, especially New York, to having legal physicians or nurses carry concealed weapons? And what is the resistance? And does that, or has any evidence shown that that may help prevent or
Do we
no
need university
difference
police for
in an
this?
active shooter situation, whether it's here in New York or outside in any other state? Has there any difference been shown of people carrying, law-abiding citizens carrying guns? Would they prevent or help mitigate some of the damage that could be done by an active shooter?
I'm actually going to jump in here because it's because we're a state institution that's a state, and they're a police force. They have the rules for the state that are different from NYPD in our campus. And I don't see somebody, I don't know the answer, but I don't see somebody from University Police. But if you come here and you come to the hospital, you're supposed to turn in your firearm where they lock it up at University Police.
And that's my question. If this is a gun-free zone, I mean, how then, who determines what guns are allowed in and what not? I mean, we have guns in the room right now. I mean, it's not, and those are legal
Okay, as I say, I think that's a University Police answer, but maybe you guys can help me on that one, because I don't see Vinny or Izzy here, so. But it's a great question, I just,
Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful.
I think it's a great question.
Presentation.
Izzy, can you answer that?
Chief Cordoza's back there.
Oh.
He's trying to hide. He's not doing very well.
Could you answer that question, please, Chief? I do want to say, as I see people have to get out, if there's nothing else that you get out of the last 3.5, 4 hours, depending on how you count it, please go to where you work the most of the time and look around and see where you would either run or evacuate or barricade or hide, and kind of give yourself a plan, I mean, none of us really have file cabinets anymore, there's a lot of, just think about it, just spend 10 seconds when you go back to the place that you work the most frequently or where you are in the wards, and think about where you would do that. I always sort of that's the training. If we get that across in 3 hours, we're 100% successful. Think about how you would do that.
Hi, thanks for coming today, really appreciate it. Could you talk about the importance of an emergency alert system, not only having an emergency alert system in a hospital or in an educational facility, but also the awareness that that emergency alert system exists, maybe talking about having that notification as part of your onboarding process for new employees, so they're aware of it when they come on board. One of the lessons I know learned from Virginia Tech and other university shootings was that quick notification, the possibility of a lockdown needed to exist, and very quickly. If you can just talk about that a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, the emergency alert system, and there's a few commercially available, I believe it's imperative. It's a great asset to have, especially in a larger corporation. I'll give you a quick story. One of the recent school shootings, we were at our home base here, and we were compiling the information of what was going on. And one of our detectives ran in the room, and he had a whole lot more information than we did. You know why? Because his daughter was at the school, and she was looking out the window. She got the alert. She looked out the window. She called her father, who was a detective over there, and started telling us what was going on. She also said that she would not have even known that something was going on had she not gotten that alert. She was chastised by her father for looking out the window, but that's another story. But an emergency alert system can really help coordinate an evacuation or a shelter or anything going on. It doesn't have to be an absolute emergency. It could be, there's a whole host of things that could be affected by it. But an emergency alert system, I think, would be key in any larger organization.
Just to follow up quickly, I know we mentioned blackout areas where we may not get cell phone reception, but there's multiple mechanisms. Email, telephone, so even in blackout areas, you can get messages through a number of different ways. Home telephone, work telephone,
Most of the commercial products that are out there these days will send the message simultaneously to any devices that are hooked in there: email, text message, social media. There's private groups you can set up on social media that will extend that information. The quickest you can get the message out with the most information, and that's a challenge, is gaining situational awareness to tell people what you need to do. Shelter in place, evacuate, do this, don't do this. The less likely they are to become part of the problem. And it's obviously in all of our best interest, and now that you all are the torchbearers, to go out and start asking the question, do we have a mass notification system? How do we use it? Is it someone who simply thinks they can turn on a PA and then realizing the PA doesn't actually function in all parts of the hospital? These are the questions that you need to start asking internally. We started at the beginning and said we don't have all the answers. Jin said that in his presentation, but it gives you at least some information to carry forth and start asking the questions and advocating for that. They're not cheap, but they can save people's lives, certainly in the midst of tragedy and incidents that are occurring.
Thank you very much for a really scary and interesting presentation. You've come to a medical center, so people are asking a lot of questions that are of a particular type. And my mind goes to how in medicine in the last period of time, we base our treatments on evidence. So there's a whole focus on evidence-based treatment. And I noticed people were talking opinions about this, opinions about that. Is there any attempt in government or in anti-terrorism work to really be able to say this is an evidence-based response that gives us a good outcome? I'm just wondering, is there any overriding agency or any attempt to try to figure out, does it make sense to actually have to sign in and bring your ID to your dentist? Or, airport security, is there any evidence?
So procedures, training, everything we do is for the most part based on past experience. Experience is evidence. So, if we're teaching and we have procedures in place that you must do step A, B, and C, there's a reason. We usually just don't make up, hey, you know what, let's throw in this just for the heck of it and see what happens. I mean, it's like you speak of medicine being evidence-based, well, this works, and this sometimes works. This always works. So we'll go with that. That's pretty much how we do it as well.
So one of the challenges, the benefits obviously of living in the country that we live in, but one of the challenges is every response is a local response, and that is how every response is managed. And so it's up to that local agency or organization to create plans. The short answer is there is no one overarching agency because some of our agencies and organizations overlap. There are some gaps. We realize that every time there's a new incident or a new challenge. But there are a lot of agencies, including the FBI, the National Fire Academy, and the Hartford Consensus, that are working to fill these gaps and start addressing areas that we know need to be addressed. But there's no one oversight agency that's responsible. The FBI is suspected terrorism or known terrorism. What about all the other stuff? And so that's what we have to work towards, is that consistent information sharing, planning, training, and exercising. But ultimately, the National Response Framework, the National Incident Management System, all say it's your responsibility, and that's why we're sitting in this auditorium today.
And I just want to say, from an academic point of view, it's very hard to do a double-blind study in the middle of a disaster, and it would have some real ethical issues with that. The other issue that is, since my research is all in disaster management and disaster stuff, is that many journals are not interested in case studies of what happened during a disaster. So then you end up publishing in a place that is not PubMed. And so there's a lot more literature out there than is really particularly easily accessible, which is also just a sort of a problem within that kind of, as medicine merges with management in the disaster world. So it is very difficult to get those studies. And many of the times it's just, well, this is what happened in this particular time, and we think we could have done it better some other way. There's a few things from Katrina, like the people who evacuated the sickest patients first actually did better than the people who evacuated the least sick patients first. That's not, you know, that's 2 hospitals in comparison, but there's not a lot, and it's very, very difficult to even get it considered by most editors for most good journals.
My name's Paul, I'm an emergency medicine resident here at Downstate. And I think that a lot of what I heard, both from the panel and also from the questions, is the sense that hospitals and emergency rooms are a soft target, much like schools or other places of commerce. I think most of the questions really focus on how do we make this soft target somewhat more resilient, somewhat harder. And if each of you could, develop your shopping list and implement one thing, not worried about the cost, that would make, an average workplace or an emergency department, more resilient to these types of events, what would each of you choose?
Individual responsibility. You have to take ownership. This is your workplace, this is your life, these are your patients. You have to take ownership of that. We can come in and we can implement regulations and oversight and policies and procedures, but if you don't take it seriously enough to be able to protect yourself, why should you expect anybody else to do it for you?
Donnie?
The without regard to cost is I'd love it, but bottom line is, if you're on a floor and you see somebody you don't know, are you going to ask them, what are you doing here? Who are you? That's what, we're talking about here, individual responsibility. You know your area better than us or anybody responding. You know who's supposed to be there. You know what's out of place. Question it. Just make sure you know who's coming and going. I mean, sometimes it's hard in a big hospital like this or in any around the city where there's literally thousands of people walking in and out and going to different areas. But if it's a restricted area, what are they doing there,
I think if I had one thing to do, if there was no barriers, it would be training. And what I mean by that is regularly scheduled exercises. That exercises not just active shooter, but some other type of disaster. In other words, each month or each quarter tests some other scenario, including active shooter. I don't think we do enough of that. The argument is always, well, we can't shut down operations. So that's one of the barriers. It's a real barrier. So it's hard to exercise in an active emergency department, but that's the way that we get better and the way that we're prepared for things that don't happen on a regular basis. So training and getting our personnel, the docs, nurses, techs, to buy into it, to actually get engaged and be interested, because once it happens, they're interested. But before then, you find a lot of people who aren't, I don't have time for that. And that's been a real barrier. If you get rid of that barrier, that's what I would do.
I agree with what my colleagues have said up here. And we talked earlier about how, if it's a soft target, okay, do you want to have a metal detector? How sophisticated are your security cameras? All those are important questions. Now, when you say this is a soft target, here's another question to think about. Is there an expectation of privacy when you walk into a hospital? For the public, or for employees, or for doctors, or for patients? That's a hard question to answer. If you were gonna institute a metal detector, as we said before, are you gonna make employees walk through it? I mean, think of the logistical hurdles that would cause at shift changes at different times of day. In the ER, if you wheel a patient in and that patient's family members are racing behind in a car, are they gonna stop and get in line to go through a metal detector? So it's, executing and giving the best judgment to the people in charge is what, if I had a blanket list, would just be to hire people that would be in the best possible position to use the best judgment on how to protect this place to the degree possible. There's inherent risks because we simply can't predict behavior, and that's what it comes down to.
I think if I had to pick one thing, it would be the actual activation of your emergency plan. And not specifically during the busiest staff time of the day. Maybe activate your emergency plan at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, there's a lot of infrastructure behind that and notifications, but to be able to determine truly if your plan that you have prepared, thought out, and put together, if it's actually going to work. And so, but that would be my number one thing.
I think
just to tag on really quick, Doc, to Dr. Berger's comment, Don't forget, you're not in this by yourself. 2 of your sister hospitals have done these exercises before you. We used vacant wards. We used their training facilities. You're only limited by your own imagination. You don't have to shut down operations. You don't have to shut down part of your hospital. Maybe you reach out to one of your sister organizations and see if they have a location that you can use. It's not about your facility. It's about teaching your people the knowledge, skills, and abilities to respond adequately. Don't just think about SUNY Downstate. Is there someplace else that you can use on a daily basis, run a couple of people through? One person has the potential to impact the behavior of additional other people.
Anything? I thought I saw someone over there. Oh, okay, thank you.
Sometimes it seems that some of the decisions that are made are random to somebody like me. For instance, I went to a Broadway play last weekend, no metal detector. But if you go to a basketball game, there's a metal detector at the Garden. My husband and I very rarely fly. We booked two seats. I got the preferred list where I didn't have to take my shoes off. He had to stand on the long line. I mean, are these evidence-based decisions? Why did I have to, like, there was one shoe bomber and then everyone had to take their shoes off and now only a few people. How do you make these decisions?
The decisions are for the most part, venue-based. You're talking about the Garden, the Barclays. They're going to screen you no matter what. That's their policy. It's policy-driven. You went to a play, that theater may be big, may be small. Their policy is we don't want to infringe on our customers coming in. Absolutely up to them. As far as, I can't speak about TSA, airport security, but this is all, you know, I mean, it's been advertised that the government is trying to lessen the wait time through past flying experiences. You know, I can't say why you had to, you know, you got to walk through and your husband didn't. I don't know. I wish I got to all the time. I don't, you know.
Yeah. A lot of that is based on the randomness of it. There is a chance that you will find someone just by randomly screening. Having worked in and around aviation for 24 years, there is value to that when you go in thinking one thing's going to happen and something else completely happens. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to make knee-jerk reaction decisions. When the underwear bomber and the shoe bomber both ended up on airplanes, we had to make some pretty rash decisions as a country, and fortunately I'm not part of that decision-making process, to say, if 2 of those guys got on, what else is out there that we don't know about? Same thing post 9/11, again, near and dear to your hearts. Nobody ever foresaw that happening, and as a consequence of that, we had to harden cockpit doors and we had to implement additional screening measures. Sometimes it is a knee-jerk reaction, but that's because people have already proven they have the capability to cause harm. And it's not always the wisest decision, but it's the decision that's made with the information we have at hand, and somebody's got to make the decision because the potential for harm has already been proven.
Even in Brooklyn, when we were going around looking at high schools for my son, some of the high schools had metal detectors, some of them didn't. It seemed totally random.
Sure. Again, those are policy level decisions driven by the school district or the owner of the school if it's a private school or a charter school, and so it's up to them to decide what they're willing to tolerate and what they're not willing to tolerate.
And I think we have one more question and then we need to quit.
It looks like it's very difficult to prevent the first few injuries or deaths. Does conflict resolution or mitigation prevent this, or it's just useless? We just have to run and duck and run.
I'm sorry, would conflict...
Is conflict resolution or conflict mitigation helpful in this situation?
In an active shooter?
Yes.
Yeah.
No. Not 100%, but as a policy, no. Sandy Hook, the principal at Sandy Hook was a very, very courageous woman, but the bottom line is she lost her life unnecessarily. She tried to reason with a madman who was not thinking rationally. By definition, anybody that's going to go into any place and shoot up the place is not rational.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you rationalize or try to rationalize with an insane person? So as a matter of policy, no.
I want to thank the panel and I want to thank the people. Oh, Patty has a couple questions that were written.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions and I want to do them justice. With your on-site experience, this is a hospital question, can you recommend the best practice protocol to handle arrival of a large volume of families to the hospital, a call-in number or an information number?
I'm going to interrupt that. SUNY Downstate's emergency management plan is online, and it has a policy of how we deal with a large influx of family members looking for their patients. So that exists, and it exists in pretty much most emergency management plans. So I'm going to cut that one off at the knees.
I will add to that, though, that is a result of the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting as well, and there's new articles that are coming out with information based on how they were not prepared for that and the additional challenges with the family and friends reunification that created for the hospital. So in addition to what you're saying, Doc, there's also additional information out there that folks can look up and see what some of their challenges were.
For those New Yorkers here who walked around Grand Central Station with the pictures, have you seen my person on September 12th, 13th, 19th? You know, we really, as a society, we've really tried to stop that. It did not work particularly well. After Sandy, there was Irene and Sandy, there was a lot of people who were lost, and hopefully now the governor's impetus over the last 6 years to do e-fines where we can track people might work. And with that, there's 311 where you can contact, and the Office of the Medical Examiner also is trying to put those three together. And in addition to that, there's another program through UVIS, is it?
Yes.
UVIS is the medical examiners.
UVIS.
We also have something called NICEP that we're integrating, which will allow much quicker
Yeah. New York City Department of Health is trying to get all of them to talk to each other. And so hopefully that should happen very quickly.
Yes.
Great.
And you're absolutely correct, because the families come in, they're inquiring. We're working on this because we want to be very confident. We want to get, what's very key is the information about these patients, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to thank all of you. The program was excellent. And my question, thank you, with all the information, was very helpful. Thank you for taking me as the last question.
Patty says you're not the last question, but I think I'm going to like it. No. I'll answer them privately.
Okay.
I'll answer them
No,
privately.
this is an important one. During an active shooter incident, is it legally allowed for us to leave our patients?
Okay, this is an ethical question, and
They want to know legally.
Yes. Yes. Legally, the policy, and nobody will ever write it or ever say it or ever do anything with it, but both EMTALA and patient abandonment is not going to be prosecuted during those events. I know a lot of physicians, including myself, are very frightened based on Memorial in New Orleans, but I do believe that the precedent has been set pretty well now. So I think, yes, it's legally okay for you to save yourself, and your patient may suffer as a result of that and may have a morbidity, but it's more important to go on to take care of the next patient. And that's an ethical issue, which we actually had an ethical symposium on in 2012, and I'm sorry that the person who asked that question wasn't there for the symposium, because we fought about it for about 8 hours. So, but that's my opinion, and I think that most ethicists are standing up in line on that one as well.
I have more.
No. Anyway, thank you all. Thank Patty. I want to also, I know it's really gotten to be just the bare minimum of people, but the AV team here at the university and telecom and IT, I mean, there's like 7 or 8 people back there that have made this all work seamlessly. And for those of us that have been at Downstate more than 20 minutes, we all know that that's a really big deal, and we really want to thank them. This is not an easy building for them, and well done, John and Luke and everybody in your team. Thank you, thank you, thank you.